Hello, everyone. We're about to get started. If you'd like to take a seat. We've reserved some seats in the front row for our speakers and moderators. Hi. All right, and I think we're about to get started. So let me extend a warm welcome to everyone in the room and also those watching online. I hope we pressed record. We're going to record this session or this conference, and we hope to publish it online. So thank you for joining us to Bellona's annual Climate Action Conference that we've organized for the first time this year on the occasion of Bellona opening its office in Brussels 30 years ago. So today we're going to explore the topic of industrial decarbonization, the opportunities, the challenges we're facing. It's a topic that's increasingly more and more on the agenda here in Brussels, especially when it comes to how we can maintain the competitiveness of European industries in the context of the green transition, and the coming legislature will be key in ensuring that becomes a reality. So while it may feel like a hot topic right now in Brussels, Bellona has actually been working on industrial decarbonization for many decades, and we are very excited to open up the discussion today that has been very important to us and something that we've been working on for a long time to explore the many aspects of industrial decarbonization with you today. So we'll dive into the decarbonization of the power sector, the role of demand-side interventions, the acceleration of CO2 infrastructure deployment, all of them to enable the industry to reduce its emissions. Finally, we'll discuss how carbon pricing can effectively incentivize low-carbon manufacturing. We'll be taking a comprehensive 360-degree approach, as much as that is possible within one afternoon, looking at both incentives and regulations, the carrot and the stick, and elements that all need to sort of come together to facilitate decarbonizing our industries effectively, efficiently, and as soon as possible. So we hope that by the end of this afternoon, when you leave here, you will feel galvanized to turn these ideas into reality, and that this conversation will continue beyond this room. So just a few housekeeping rules. You'll be able to ask questions at the end of each panel. For those of you here in the room, I will be circulating with a microphone. Just raise your hand, and for those of you online, please use the Q&A function on Zoom, and my colleague will be monitoring your questions and passing them along to our moderators. So after our first two discussions, we'll have a half-an-hour coffee break, followed by 2 more sessions, and then we'll wrap up the conference with closing remarks from our director, Jonas Hellstedt. If you can, we'd love for you to join us at our 30-year anniversary reception in our office just across the road, especially if you've registered to come. But even if you didn't, maybe we can accommodate you. And my colleagues in the back of this room will set up a media corner where they would like to interview some of you for the conference after a movie. So I'd encourage all of you to stop by and chat with them in the coffee break if you can, and if you would like to be featured in the after movie. But now, without further ado, I would like to give the word to Mr. Kurt van den Berge, Director General of DG Klima, to deliver his keynote address. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation, and first of all, congratulations on the 30th anniversary. That's a great figure to have, 30 years. If Bellona did not exist, we would have to invent it, I think. I really want to take this opportunity to thank Bellona and many, many other stakeholders here in Brussels and way beyond for all the input we're getting, all the discussions like the one you are organizing today. This is very, very helpful for us, and we'll need that in the next 5 and next 25 years as we go towards climate neutrality and resilience by 2050. And when I read Bellona's roadmap for the next 5 years, it says it all: deployment of climate infrastructure, science-based robust policy making, and well-functioning markets for a net zero world. That's exactly what we have ahead of us. So we already look forward to working with you on this very ambitious but necessary program. The next 5 years will be very challenging. It won't be a walk in the park, but it will be very exciting. And we need everyone on board. What is clear, I hope, for everyone, is that we will stay the course on the European Green Deal. As President von der Leyen has said, and as is also made very clear in the mission letters to the various commissioners who are currently preparing for their hearings. We will stay the course on the Green Deal. We may not paint it in dark green. Maybe we'll call it more clean than green. Maybe we will preach less about climate and practice more, but definitely the direction is set, and we need to stay the course, because achieving this transition is existential for Europe. Not only for ecological reasons, but maybe even more for economic and security reasons, because we know what is happening in the rest of the world. There is a global race going on to net zero. When we launched the European Green Deal in 2019, we were surfing on a wave of popular support and political demand for green, but we were alone in the world. Today, it's actually the reverse that is happening. We see that our public is getting worried, concerned about the costs and the feasibility of this transition. But we're no longer alone in the world. We know what is happening in the United States with the Inflation Reduction Act. China is definitely now a green superpower, investing more in renewables than the rest of the world combined. The latest figures I saw were that 2/3 of renewable energy addition is happening in China. And even Africa is turning the page. I read, to my big surprise last week, that a country like Ethiopia is now forbidding the import of internal combustion engines. Because they can't afford the fossil fuel bill anymore. So this is where the world is going. And on top of that, for Europe, as for the rest of the world, it's of course a security agenda. Not only in terms of our costly dependence on fossil fuel imports, but also when we look at the impacts, the growing impacts and risks from climate change, as we are witnessing in Central and Eastern Europe, but also in Italy, where we have these terrible floods. And at the same time, we have wildfires in Portugal that mobilize more than 1,000 firemen to get these fires under control. So it's also a security agenda from that point of view. So for us, it's an existential agenda. And I really would like to invite everyone to really look at the European Green Deal as an agenda for modernizing our economy and renewing our industry so that we make it fit for the future. A future that will be warmer, that will be less secure, that will be globally more competitive than what we have had over the last few decades. I really would like to invite everyone to look at the European Green Deal and its implementation as an innovation and investment shock to our economy. A shock that we need, a shock that has been delayed for too long, but one that we definitely need, because what we need is innovation and investment to make sure that we renew our economic fabric and that we really raise our productivity levels. And it's maybe good to underline that in doing this, the EU is actually on track. This is not very often said, but when you look at the figures with a cool hand, what we see is that Europe has systematically decoupled its emissions from economic growth since 1990. We have reduced emissions by 37% from 1990 to 2023, while our economy has grown by close to 70%. The figures of emission reduction in 23 compared to 22 are also quite significant. It will be in the order of 8% in 1 year that we reduced emissions. At the same time, we see that unemployment is at historically low levels. Investment rates are increasing. We've seen a tripling of investment in clean energy over the last 5 years. Our trade surplus is as big as it was ever before the pandemic. And even our manufacturing index doesn't compare badly with that of the United States. Where we have a big problem, a really serious reason for concern, is the future of energy-intensive industries in Europe. Those that produce steel, cement, glass, aluminium, chemicals, etc. These industries have a hard time. They don't have a business case for the moment in Europe to invest in that decarbonization trajectory. So that is really where our attention needs to go. And I think we have everything in place now for achieving our 2030 targets. We have what I hear from colleagues, policymakers across the Atlantic, a quite good policy mix, which makes many in the world jealous, where we combine carbon pricing with regulation or mandates and coupling that with a funding and financing framework. So what matters now for us is that we implement what we have agreed for 2030, not add anything, simplify where possible, pay a lot more attention to just transition, the social dimension of this, and to climate adaptation, making ourselves better prepared for a more violent future environment, but implement really what we have agreed to do. Secondly, work more on an industrial strategy. That is really the new important elements that President von der Leyen has brought to our agenda. We need an industrial strategy, but that industrial strategy must be linked intrinsically to our decarbonization objective. No decarbonization without an industrial strategy, but also no industrial strategy without decarbonization. That is something that we will have to work on in the next few months and years. We will also become and need to become even more international active than we've been so far. We have the COP coming up in Baku, but the real challenge will be in Belém next year, in the midst of the Amazon forests, where this will be a moment of truth to see whether the world will be on track to achieve the Paris Agreement goals. And the fourth element in our agenda is that of investment. Really, that's where it all boils down to. We need to invest massively more. Mr. Draghi has mentioned the famous figure of 800 billion euros a year. In terms of the decarbonization investment needs, we estimate that this will need an additional investment of 2% of GDP between now and 2050. These are massive amounts, but they are not undoable and they are not unprecedented. Our investment rate today in Europe is around 22% of GDP. China, 40%. We need to go to 24, 25%, which is actually what we had in the 1970s. In the 1970s, Europe had an investment rate of 25% of GDP. So that is what we have ahead of us. And I personally think that, and with me, many colleagues in the European Commission, we believe that we can pull this off. It won't be a walk in the park, but it is possible if we follow really resolutely and consistently the principle of cost efficiency. And cost efficiency means that we need to provide a regulatory stability, not change the goalposts, not change the rules every time, but give long-term predictability. That's why we will come as early as possible with our proposal for the climate emission reduction target by 2040. And President von der Leyen has clearly said we'll go for 90%. Secondly, we need to find the right ways of de-risking private sector investment. No way that the public budgets, let alone at European level, can fund all this. So we need to find the right instruments, financial instruments, to share risk with the private sector. Thirdly, we need to maximize the use of the single market in terms of mobilizing capital and investments and savings, but also in terms of smartly specializing what we do where. It does not make sense for countries like Germany, and I've said this before, to invest massive amounts of public money in subsidizing the production of renewable hydrogen, if this can be done 5 to 10 times cheaper in countries like Norway, Finland, or Spain, Portugal, as we've seen from our recent auction for renewable hydrogen. But obviously, this really requires that then we have the interconnectors between North and South and the industrial heartland. That is the kind of single market that we really have to deploy in practice. We need an all-of-technology approach to this. We cannot afford to close our eyes to technology routes where these are necessary, and I know that Bellona also has worked hard on the route of carbon capture and storage and carbon capture and use. We will need this big time in the next decade, of course, with all the necessary framework conditions, and that's part of our plan in going to the next decade. We need an all-of-economy approach. That means that we also have to bring in agriculture and food under our policy framework. That sector is critically important for our future in terms of providing food as an essential service to our society, but we also need to make sure that that sector contributes to decarbonization, because if agriculture and food production doesn't do it, others will have to do more. And of course we need an all-of-society approach, not leaving anyone behind, and certainly not leaving behind the people with the skills that we will need in the future. So reskilling, upskilling, skilling to core is something that has to become a much bigger priority than it already has been so far. But the real frontier that I believe we have ahead of us, and which is a fantastic opportunity for Europe, is realizing the circular economy, where we move from looking at everything through the lens of a carbon footprint to a material footprint. And that is a very promising agenda for making sure that we move to a new model of production and consumption, one that is no longer based on mass producing goods, where we will never be able to compete with Asia, but a model of mass customization of goods and services. Like we have personalized medicine, we also should have a much more personalized production and consumption, where we use the highest tech possible combined with the digital frameworks that we have. If we pull this off, then I think we have real confidence in the future of Europe and in our global competitiveness. And that's the whole work program we have ahead of us for the next 5 years. So I very much look forward to working with all of you and with Bellona and many, many other organizations in this space. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I think the message is clear. The Green Deal is not going anywhere. We're not going back. We're not turning back. So thank you very much for that keynote, that very valuable perspective. And I think you have really given us something to build this conference on. We're sorry you're not able to stay for longer. But yeah, thank you for coming, and we wish you a great day ahead. And now I'm excited to introduce the first panel, which will explore the decarbonization of the power sector and its role in industrial decarbonization. Please join me in welcoming my colleague, Luisa Kessler, Policy Advisor on Sustainable Hydrogen Economy from our Berlin office, moderating the panel, and our lineup of experts, Federico Benito Dona, Policy Manager in the Climate and Energy Department of Eurofer, European Steel Association. You can already climb the stage, thank you. Bram Claes, Senior Advisor and Policy Team Leader at the Regulatory Assistance Project, Global NGO, and Anna Stürk, MEP in the Renew Europe group. So the floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction, Hannah. Good afternoon, everybody, and very welcome, very warm welcome to the first panel of our conference today on the topic of decarbonizing the power system for an industrial transition in the European Union. Obviously, it's a critical topic. It's one that sits at the very heart of Europe's energy transition as we strive towards a more sustainable and low-carbon future. For many years, the conversation has been centered around increasing renewable electricity capacity as such, and while that's undeniably very important, it will also remain very important, the conversation has been evolving a little bit over the past few years, and now we're recognizing more and more that in order to truly meet our climate targets, it's not just enough to produce renewable power as such, but it's also really about transmitting it in a reliable, efficient and sustainable manner to where it's really needed to achieve emission cuts. So basically the power grid is rightly described as the backbone of our energy transition. Without modern and resilient and interconnected grids, much of the energy or renewable electricity potential that we have won't reach the places where it's needed. It will continue to get curtailed unnecessarily and just remain untapped for the transition. Now, last year, famously, the Grid Action Plan recognized that placing grids at the heart of the energy transition and decarbonization efforts is vital. It highlighted the role that modernized grids will play in integrating renewables and integrating and managing the challenging intermittency of renewables as well. And last but not least, obviously, also the link to supporting the electrification of entire industries, which is exactly the nexus that we're going to address on this panel today. And then lately, the talk of town is obviously the Draghi report, which likewise made an essential link between modernizing grids and industrial decarbonization in Europe. It showed that upgrading grids is about really enabling Europe's broader industrial but also economic transformation, right? So now with the new political cycle, let's say, the newly elected parliament, the new commission forming, this is, as per usual, when new legislators start, it's an opportune moment to place critical topics on top of the agenda. And we certainly at Bellona think that grid expansion and grid deployment is one of those critical challenges that presents us with a lot of opportunities as well. So we look forward to hearing the insights from our panelists today on the practical steps that are needed to enhance grid capacity and grid infrastructure, maybe the policy gaps that we have to address in the next legislature, and how to essentially help grids enable our ambitious climate goals. This panel will be roughly structured into 3 different parts. First of all, we're going to start off by talking about grid infrastructure as such, and then we'll dive a little bit into system flexibility and close off with electricity markets and financing aspects of that. So let me start with Anna. Thank you for being here. I've already mentioned the Grid Action Plan, but that's obviously also, I think it should be on already, I hope.
Let's see, yeah.
Yes, it is. That's just one piece of the policy puzzle around grids. Now as a new member of the European Parliament and also a member of the ITRE committee, we were wondering, how do you feel about the grid policy landscape, let's say? Do you feel enough has been done to kind of get it rolling right now, or are there any key things that are missing and that maybe need to be picked up in new legislation and regulation?
Well, first of all, congratulations to 30 years, and thank you so much for having me. Well, I think most importantly, we need to realize why it's so important to talk about grids. I mean, you've mentioned it in your introduction now, the fact that we will only have a real energy transition and we will only have functioning renewable energies if we also have the grids to support this, and if we have the grid infrastructure to actually get the energy to where it is needed. And this isn't just a question of getting it to places, but and supporting countries that, like my own country, I'm from Austria, we're landlocked. We need the grids in order to be able to actually have a use of, for example, offshore wind farms. So if we want the energy transition to happen, then we need the grids to support it. And I think it's really important that we all agree on this, and that the legislative, but also especially the governments, agree on this. And we'll talk about financing a little bit later on, but I'm not entirely sure whether we need new legislation as such, because a lot has happened over the last few years, and I was glad to hear the Director General state that over the next few years it's a lot about implementation and about making sure that what we've already decided on, or at least have made strategies on, will actually come into action. I think this is really important, because if we look at what has happened so far, we've got ENTSO-E, we've got European cooperation with Acer, we've got the revision of 10E that happened, and here we have seen some important steps. If we look at 10E, for example, we've managed as the Parliament, and this was my predecessor, we've managed to make sure that DSOs, so distribution system operators, could also apply for 10E financing. So this was a big step and really important, because for the first time we started thinking TSOs and DSOs together. However, again, when we look at the implementation and what is actually happening, we see that there's still a long way to go, because if we look at projects of common interest, there's only 5 projects by DSOs. And why is that? Because, first of all, the application process, it doesn't matter whether you apply for 1 million euros or 1 billion euros, not that we have that kind of money in 10E, but technically speaking, it doesn't matter what kind of money you apply for, it's always the same process. So this already is a bit of a problem. And the second problem is we have different structures in terms of TSOs and DSOs, in the sense that if you look at countries like Germany, where we have 600 DSOs, they don't have the capacity and the resources to apply for such grants. They don't have the capacity to go through those application processes. So when we look at the actual implementation and what needs to change there, we suggest that either we make sure that DSOs can apply within 10E through a different application process, make some application processes easier to get through, or look at whether we need a different financing strand for DSOs. Because again, only if we think DSOs and TSOs together can we actually get to a grid where we see results.
Right, thank you very much. Bram, now Anna already mentioned the 10E regulation. So I was wondering what RAP's take is on that. There have been discussions to reopen it. Do you think that would be a good move? And if so, what should be improved? What should be changed?
That's a great question. And thank you very much also. And congratulations with the anniversary. And thanks for having us on this important panel. Yeah, there's this intriguing sentence in the mission letter to the proposed energy commissioner to look at the grid's legal framework again. The question is, what does that mean? I totally agree that, of course, a lot has been done in the follow-up to the gas energy crisis. The electricity market reform has happened, that needs to be implemented, and 10E, after all, hasn't been reopened so long ago. So we should very much focus on implementation, that's true. That all being said, I'm sure we can think of things that can be improved. If we think of what we need for better grids build out, it's better planning, more flexibility for efficiency, and faster rollout, faster realization of projects. And now 10E is, of course, instrumental in a lot of those aspects, But I think if we can make progress on better sector coupling, vector integrated planning than we have today in the context of the TYNDP, to better integrate flexibility and storage, and to better make the connection between energy vectors. TENI has said, no, we have to move away from gas, which is, of course, more than justified. We're now seeing the integration of hydrogen into the infrastructure planning. But you feel on everything that this is still something that we need to get used to, that needs to be improved. And for example, avoid that previous gas projects all of a sudden turn into hydrogen projects. If we can make sure that the selection of projects that come out of the TYNDP and PCI, PMI process is enhanced in transparency, if any hint of arbitrariness can be removed, I think that would be a huge step forward, along with improvements that are set in motion by the grid action plan. For example, create clarity around things like anticipatory investment. So yes, I do think there is room for improving, further building on the regulatory framework, including TENI. But there's definitely also a lot of room of implementation ahead of us.
Certainly. So focus is on implementation, but there's always room for improvement in the basic legislative text, of course. Federico, I'm sure that a resilient and efficient grid system is also very important for the steel industry, but for the grid and the energy system, the electricity system to be efficient, also the demand side perspective cannot be neglected, of course. And the steel industry is becoming an ever more important and bigger off-taker of electricity. So we were wondering if you could provide a little bit more context to the extent that the steel sector currently supports flexibility of the system, and maybe the potential that it will have to do so in the future.
Thanks again. Thank you, Bellona, and congratulations again for the anniversary. And it's a real pleasure to be in this panel as well. Know that the Parliament is close to us. So yeah, the flexibility for me is a great occasion to be in this power system related discussion as large industrial energy consumer, because there is a big paradigm shift happening right now in Brussels when it comes to energy policy making and discussions, as the demand side of things is becoming ever more relevant in the way we move forward with investments, in the way we design markets, and in the way we have to consume electricity and reduce and be efficient. So for us, it's a great occasion to, first of all, explain who we are for the system flexibility. For those of you who don't know, Eurofer represents roughly steel makers across 22 member states out of 27. So we have a fairly distributed view of the evolution of the energy system and its decarbonization in Europe. And most of all, our decarbonization is in the making. We are shifting from roughly 75 terawatt-hour of electricity consumed per year to 165 terawatt-hour in 2030 to get up and running our 60+ low-carbon energy projects. So this data is important to understand that our energy consumption is going to double in double digits in the short term, and at the same time there is an increasing variable energy system coming online, which is demanding everyone to play its part, helping out the grid sustain weather-dependent intermittent renewable generation unevenly distributed in Europe. So for us, it's a double-sword challenge that we have to address. In addition to that, for those, expert in power system knows that already, but the steel industry has been there for a long time when it comes to system flexibility. We are connected at TSO level, most of our companies. We have been there mainly through the provision of ancillary services to system operator. We are operating in secondary, tertiary reserves. To sustain in the short term, for a short-term period, the functional electricity system of the grids. And we are extremely happy to see in the new EMD, you could already see the push from the Commission in boosting the contribution to flexibility. The Commission is very clear in what type of flexibility needs we need. The intra-daily flexibility are the large majority of the needs that we need in 2025 and 2030, followed by daily and weekly and yearly. And as much as also clear that the technology potential of system flexibility in Europe is largely untapped. We have smart chargings, V2G, which are set to play a big role. Industrial demand is following in the third place. So the steel industry, we are extremely, we are welcoming this new approach. We are welcoming the autonomy strategy on demand side response and flexibility. Actually, what we believe is essential is to have a clear map at EU level of what are the flexibility needs exactly, what technology can do, what technology can deliver the best, and for additional targets that will come at national level because of DMD, Article 19D, and so on and so forth. We need to have a clear map of what additional effort can be done, and specific, sector-specific, because this is mentioned in legislation. When we go in sector-specific analysis, and that's where we are concerned about, we need to keep into account the flexibility from an industrial player which is demanding an energy consumption on a stable level 24/7. There are some costs in adjusting our demand. There are some technical costs and economic costs, well known to system operators. And what we would like to see in the upcoming future is probably a stronger EU guidance for the member states in how to design how to set the targets, how to organize the participation to demand response schemes in a way which is not overburdening the sector, but actually incentivizing us to keep doing what we are doing and even more. Given that, again, we are set to consume actually twice more than what we are doing. Just to conclude, in terms of, I want to just delve a little bit more, dig a little bit more in the technicalities and the economic and technical limits of flexibility in the steel sector. From an economic point of view, megawatt hour are associated with production of steel. We are a customer-driven business, which means that we have to respond to a globalized, highly demanded market. So ceasing consumption of energy is not such a free thing that we can do. There are economic costs to be taken into account, the investment cost on the capital assets that have been deployed to make steel, and also the opportunity cost of foregoing consumption in order to accommodate the request to cut power, load shedding of the system operator. So fairly remunerating this operation in this perspective is key for the steel industry. And that we hope that this will be clear at any level of policymaking. When it comes to technical limits, and this is probably the decarbonization challenge attached to the flexibility demand that we have, there are some specific physical and chemical parameters that have to be respected for a steel plant, which is an integrated process in which multiple assets are intertwined, multiple energy flows. So to be taken into account, and among which technical safety reasons in shutting down power. Power cannot be shut down in a steel plant with the same degree of velocity and flexibility than other sectors. Otherwise, we risk huge damage on the assets, whether this is an electric arc furnace and a DRI. So I would say having in mind these elements in target setting, in fair remuneration of demand-side response is important. My final message is the steel industry will continue to be there for flexibility. We want to participate. We want to contribute. And we hope to do so on the right terms.
Thank you. So obviously, flexibility measures have to be remunerated properly. And it's also clear that a lot of investment into the grid infrastructure need to happen. But Bram, what can we do to better use the existing grid capacity while we also scale up investments into grid expansion? Could you expand on that a little bit, please?
Yeah, well, I like very much how Acer approaches this. And Christian Singerson from Acer always talks about flexibility as the efficiency first principle for grids. There's a big investment need in grids, 600 billion, according to European Commission figures, but there's, of course, a long lead time to make these investments happen. The supply chain, workforce, there's all kinds of issues that make this go slow. So it's really important to use the existing grid better. There's countries where the existing capacity is full, like the Netherlands, for example. But many other countries are not in this case and have capacity that can be used much better than today. And flexibility plays a key role in that. And flexibility means a lot of different things, and it's important to be clear on that. First, very important source of flexibility is interconnections, making sure that the power markets across Europe are well interconnected. But in Belgium, we are a country that is pretty well interconnected, Austria as well, but there's definitely room for improvement to get that at a proper level, and there's targets to meet. Second very important source of flexibility is, of course, demand-side flexibility. And the third one is storage. And I think on those two latter ones is where we have the biggest challenge. I agree that not every industrial plant has the same degree of flexibility. As a matter of fact, if you look at projections by Smarten, they see the biggest source of flexibility, new sources of flexibility, to be smart charging of electric vehicles and trucks, and heat pumps for domestic heating, but also low temperature process heat for manufacturing. So that's where the biggest sources of flexibility are. But at the same time, electricity markets are still posing quite a few barriers to unlocking that potential. And that starts with infrastructure, making sure that simple things that should be simple, like smart meters, are available to everyone. Making sure that the market players, electricity suppliers, are innovative in unlocking that flexibility in a way that, because we're talking a lot about household flexibility at the end of the day. So making people like you and I comfortable to enter into some kind of electricity contract that unlocks my flexibility but still makes me comfortable is, let's put it as a positive, a big source of, or a big area for innovation by our electricity suppliers. We can't, I'm a big fan of dynamic energy contracts, but we can't expect everybody to be on them. So we need smart electricity contracts that offer flexibility but still are safe for people, especially vulnerable and low-income families. So that's an important one. And then, of course, our dear friends of the transmission system operators and market operators need to design products that are fit for demand-side flexibility and storage of different kinds. There's all kinds of innovation happening in the storage. It's not just lithium-ion batteries. We've got different types of batteries, iron ore batteries that use oxidation, rust of batteries to store electricity and that have a longer lead time. Now you need balancing products that accommodate those. You need capacity mechanisms that accommodate those. So there's a lot of innovation that needs to happen, and that needs to happen really quickly to make sure that we can use our grids better through flexibility.
Thank you. So now you already mentioned battery storage as one flexibility measure. Obviously, there's probably a lot to gain from shifting renewables, putting them into battery storage and use them a few hours later, maybe during the night, when otherwise you would ramp up fossil power generation. So there's probably a lot of money also to save in gas costs and whatnot if you did that. So battery storage is more discussed as a short-term storage solution, at least at the moment. But it can potentially offer a significant amount of flexibility to the system, certainly. So Anna, I was wondering how you see this playing out in the future.
Well, first of all, I think, again, it's so important that we think of the energy transition in a holistic way. So look at the holy trinity that is renewables, storage and grids. Think of them all together, because otherwise, again, we're not going to get anywhere. When we look at flexibility, if you ask me how I see it playing out, then at the moment, I have to admit that I'm slightly pessimistic. doesn't mean we can't do anything. Why am I pessimistic? We see that we need to double our flexibility by 2030. If we think about 2030, it sounds like a long time away, but it's in 6 years. That's almost the end of this mandate, and we all know how quickly that flies by. So if we think of it another way, then I think it was easy, I've written it down, is estimates that we need to increase our storage capacity by 14 gigawatt per year in order to actually get to our goals of storage capacity. So we've got a long way to go. And as you've mentioned now, batteries, yes, there's a lot of innovation in batteries, and batteries are great, but batteries are only for short-time storage, like you said. So there's actually a bigger need for us, again, to look at this more in a bigger picture and say, we can't put all of our eggs in one basket in the sense of only looking at batteries. We actually need all types of storage possibilities, looking at power to gas, but also pumped hydro storage, a really important aspect. I mean, there's a great project that maybe some of you have heard. It's Lüneseewerk, which is a project in Austria that could technically become they call themselves the potential biggest battery of Central Europe. However, they're stuck in permitting. And that is a huge problem we're seeing both with new possibilities for storage, especially pumped hydro storage, where they just get stuck in permitting. I mean, you know, they're looking at 8 to 10 years until they can even start to build. In 8 to 10 years, it's past 2030. And we see this happening in so many different projects. So we need to get much faster and quicker when it comes to permitting. But also, as you said, with regards to innovation and research, there's a lot of storage opportunities and possibilities that we haven't even discovered yet or haven't even looked at. There's a lot of innovation out there, but we need to support it both financially, but also in terms of permitting, in terms of opportunity, in terms of possibility for them to actually get going. I think if we do that, then there is a possibility. And so what we're asking for and what we think is necessary is a energy storage strategy. We've now got the hydrogen strategy, that's great. But as I said, we need to look at energy storage in a very holistic way. We need to look at it in an interconnected approach. And so I think if we don't have a proper strategy, looking at how we can use it throughout Europe. And there again, I was very pleased to hear the Director General kind of mention that we need to look at energy through the lens of the single market, in sense of looking at Europe as a whole. To do that, we also need to integrate the single market more, have an actual energy union, because then and only then can we overcome national interest and make sure that we actually invest and make possible energy infrastructure throughout Europe, making national states realize that if we invest in an energy infrastructure project, in a storage project, in Austria, for example, or giving it away from my own national interests, in Denmark, in the Netherlands, wherever, it can also support them and increase their prosperity. So we need to really also get to integrating our energy markets 100%, because only then can we really make sure that everyone also enjoys the benefits of it. And maybe just one last thing, because we mentioned the demand side on flexibility. I think this is really important as well. And you know, you mentioned smart meters. You know, there's only 13 member states that have sufficiently rolled out smart meters. 13. That's not enough. It's not even half. So there is really a long way for us to go. And maybe one last remark to what you said about households, you know, and making sure that we all become part of the energy transition. I think there's also, as you said, I think there's a positive way of looking at this. And everyone can become part of the energy transition. And I think this is very powerful. This can be a very powerful narrative as well of democratization almost, or democratizing the energy transition. And there's very interesting projects out there. There's almost gamifications of the energy market, in the sense that, you know, you as a consumer can get a text message or a pop-up from your energy company saying, you know, now the energy is really cheap, go charge your phones. These are actual innovations out there that might seem like small things, but if we look at all of them together, they can have a big impact in getting us where we need to go.
Thank you. Let's maybe use the remaining few minutes to piggyback on some things you already mentioned that kind of pertain to also the electricity market design and looping it back to what industries, the role of industries essentially. So we all know that the Russian invasion of Ukraine and our need to rethink how we can accelerate efforts towards energy independence, that really highlighted the urgency of decarbonizing our power systems, and it resulted in the electricity market design reform. So, Bram, how successful do you think that schemes like CFDs and PPAs can be in really reducing our dependency on fossil fuels and also generating a more stable electricity price for industry?
Yeah. Well, let's think about which problem we actually want to solve here. We've had the invasion in Ukraine, 2022, 2023, massive energy price shock, gas rippling into power and electricity markets. So if we want to address that and we want to reduce volatility and decrease overall levels of electricity prices in this case, we need to take out fossil gas and the role that it plays in electricity, in the electricity system. And PPAs PPAs and CFDs, which are different types of long-term contracts for renewables, will play a role there, can play a role, but only to the extent that they address both important roles that gas plays in the electricity system. Gas is, of course, a dispatchable generation source, providing a lot of what's formerly called baseload. I don't think baseload exists anymore, which maybe my colleague to the right doesn't agree with, but it does provide a lot of bulk power, of course. But it's also a source of flexibility. So wind and solar are great at providing, especially offshore wind, are great at providing reliable bulk power. Reliable while being variable. So if PPAs and CFDs manage to unlock the potential of that renewable resource, they will bring down financing costs by de-risking those investments. And especially if it's double-sided CFDs, will also hedge consumers against price shocks. And the downside of that is that they come at a cost, of course, at times of lower electricity prices. So that's a good thing. Only if they also manage to integrate flexibility will they address the full root of the problem. So we need to look at more innovative hybrid types of PPAs that integrate flexibility and storage to deliver electricity to industrials or other consumers to bring down the cost structurally. And that's, of course, not where we are today. And that's also not necessarily prescribed in the EMD. So we will need the market for that. And I frankly also think that we need short-term markets for that. So it's not just long-term contracts that are going to save everything, but they do play an important role, I think.
Thank you very much. Looking at the time, I think it's time to open up the floor for questions from the audience. Please raise your hand and then Hannah will come and get you a microphone if you have any questions. No questions? Well, if there is no questions from the okay.
Hello, thank you for the panel. Unfortunately, I arrived late, so I might have missed some things. But Anna, you were talking about the energy storage strategy and how permitting can complicate things when it comes, for instance, to pump hydro. And how do you think this sort of like big large-scale projects can balance, on one hand, yes, providing the flexibility that we need and everything for the system, but at the same time not being like a killer for biodiversity.
Well, I think in this case, we actually had a meeting today talking about exactly this. I think there's a twofold answer to that. I think the first thing is that before we even look at where and how can we start new projects on this, it's a question of mapping. It's a question of making sure where do we actually have areas that aren't prone to raising such problems as biodiversity. I think especially when we talk about pumped hydro storage, I want to just mention there's some really interesting projects. For example, there's one in Germany. I unfortunately I forgot where exactly it is, but there's a project in Germany where they actually use an old mine where they pump from one kind of shaft, is that the shaft? From one shaft to the other, using that as a pumped hydro storage. There's not a lot of biodiversity in old mines. So this is a great example and a great project where we see that there's actually, if we think outside the box and if we allow for innovation, then we can, we can find solutions where it's not a question of do we have one or the other. However, of course, I'm not naive. I know that for most projects, we will still have this question. But there again, there's, especially if we look at Lunese, for example, from what we can tell so far from the permitting process, there is very, very little impact on biodiversity. And I think we have to just find projects where we have as little impact as possible with as high an outcome, positive outcome as possible. But there's always going to be a little bit of a trade-off. However, again, if we don't get the energy transition done, then we will have very different problems with regards to biodiversity. So, yes, it will be a trade-off, but we just have to find kind of the right balance. And with regards to permitting, I think there's definitely opportunities to still get permitting to happen quicker without failing the question of is it safe for biodiversity?
Thank you. So yeah, obviously there's always going to be trade-offs, and we have to probably also accept some sort of messiness during the transition phase. I saw you wanted to grab the microphone, and I'm assuming you wanted to kind of react to what Bram said about CFDs and PPAs. So are they going to be able to provide the prices that industry needs? Or
How much time do I have?
you have a half a minute.
Half a minute. Half a minute. Okay. We as energy consumer are struggling because of the coupling of fossil fuel prices and electricity prices, which is a structural effect of the merit order and marginal prices system, which is the way we have organized electricity markets in Europe. We have built an entire system incentivizing scarcity signals. And now we are going to need more electricity, and this is becoming at the same time very expensive. Second point, spot markets are important for one reason. Spot markets are important for a reason, and they had a huge impact on long-term contracts. They're important because they give you the real time and an indication of also what's going to happen in the future of the real value of electricity, which means that PPAs, CFDs, hedging, they all are correlated with spot market. If we don't go and tackle the reason for why we have these price levels in wholesale markets, the expectation that we can all have on PPAs and CFDs and hedging are that we have to downsize them. I think he has said I am not into react. I think I agree with most of has been said. The industry is looking at these contracts, but again, something must happen at structural level. We are a new player to this type of market. This is the PPA market is dominated mainly by the ICT industry, smaller players in terms of energy consumption, but better position in terms of financials because of a different type of business model. So we need to have tailored solution for the industry, and yet again and again and again, we need to impact assess what are the effects of maintaining this system in wholesale markets over the medium long term. So this for me is the key message I wanted to bring here, and I think the EMD reform unfortunately happened at the wrong time. We needed much more time to assess everything. Indeed, the Commission had 3 months to close the deal, and we rushed a lot. And I think that we hope, and that's what we are calling for, the Parliament to help us out in exploring the possibility of reopening this discussion again for the medium-long term, because we cannot expect much of this in terms of long-term contract in the near future, for the reason I have explained. And yeah, more than half a minute. I will offer beers.
It's okay. Well, then let me close off by thanking you all very much for coming here and participating in this panel. I guess there's still a lot of questions that we could talk about, a lot of things to discuss. But yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure.
All right, thank you very much for that very insightful and engaging discussion. Indeed, there will be a group picture taken on this side. And I just wanted to remind everyone, actually tell everyone, because I forgot to mention this too, when you ask a question, just mention your name and affiliation first. But okay, so I hope everyone found this conversation as engaging as I did. And now I think it's time to move on to our next panel. We'll shift our focus to demand-side intervention, specifically how tools like the green public procurement can help create markets for low-carbon products and accelerate industrial decarbonization. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming my colleague Irene Dominguez, Policy Manager on Embodied Carbon and Lead Markets, who is going to moderate the panel. And our panelist, Evita Gosha, who is going to join us online because of the airport strike, unfortunately. But yeah, if we can put her on very quickly, she is Environmental and Legal Director at Schwenk Latvia Cement Company. And we have also Eleanor Battier, Policy Manager at Agora Industry think tank. So thank you very much. Take it away.
Thank you very much. I just want to check first that Evita can hear as well.
Hello, everyone. I can hear you well. I hope you can hear me as well.
Yes, we can. Perfect. So now that sound check's done, let us kickstart this panel with a brief introduction to the topic from Bellona's side and our history working on it. Well, in the panel before, we've heard a little bit about how we decarbonize industry by electrification and what are the needs for decarbonizing supply in the end. And now we would like to look at what happens from the demand side, because we saw that decarbonizing supply can incur in some associated costs. So we need to strengthen the business case for industrial decarbonization, as was mentioned by the keynote speech. And one way to do that is to create lead markets for low-carbon products so that they can become the norm. From us at Bellona, we first wanted to understand exactly what low-carbon was, particularly low-carbon cement and steel, because we still hear in conversations with stakeholders that there's no harmonized definition for this. And that's why we tried to understand this at least qualitatively with our terms of reference report to help us answer these questions and engage better in discussions. And once we had a bit of a clear understanding of, okay, what are the supply options that we have, what are the transitional pathways that we're seeing, our question was, okay, how do we actually pull these decarbonized products into the market? How do we mobilize demand? And for us, public procurement soon emerged as the way to go in order to harness the purchasing power of the public sector, in particular for the building and construction sector. This month, I want to announce here that we will be publishing two important pieces of work, a report on the state of the policy in public procurement in the EU for cement and steel, and also two fact sheets to this effect. So with no further ado, let's start our panel with Eleanor. So it would be great if you can introduce us a bit to the audience to the topic of lead markets and walk us a bit through your work on the topic.
Sure, thank you, Irene, and thank you for the invitation to speak here. Very happy to be here. Let me just start with the context on the supply side and the demand side currently for energy-intensive industries. On the supply side, currently industries in Europe have to reach climate neutrality by 2040 if we follow the timeline of the revised ETS provision. On the demand side, companies in the construction industry, in the packaging industry, automotive sector are starting to make pledges to procure climate-friendly material. But we actually came out with a study last month where we analyzed the current pledges in those sectors, and we find, for example, that in the construction industry, 11% of the pledges that we reviewed actually commit to procuring such materials. There's also a study that came out recently from ICCT in the transport sectors that shows that for 2030 commitments for the automotive industry, only the combined pledges only covers 2% of their total demand, so the pledges to procure green steel. So whilst there is some movement happening on both sides, it's still rather limited. And if we can show, oh great, the slide is already there. And that's why push and pull policies are needed. At the moment, we've done a lot on the supply side, sort of the midstream with carbon pricing, and I know that you'll have a panel on this, so I don't need to say too much about this. But the issue with carbon pricing is at the demand side, the final product side, is that there are big split incentives. The carbon price, for example, is not taken in consideration by the architect when he designs the building because he just doesn't see the carbon price. Also, currently, the marginal costs at which these materials become competitive compared to their substitutes produced with climate-friendly alternatives does not match existing CO2 prices. We find, for example, and you see here on the graph, this incremental cost remains about 30%. That's for concrete and cement for 2030. So there's still important incremental costs. Some of them can be covered by subsidies. So for example, by carbon credits for difference in Germany. But there are still important, significant incremental costs remaining at the material side. But if we look at the final product side, actually, we see that these costs are reduced significantly. You have various studies and various estimates looking at this question, but we find, for example, for a building, that the final cost would only be increased by 1% by 2040 if we were to use climate-friendly cement. So cement mostly produced via CCS or oxy-fuel. So that's why push and pull policies are needed. We still need carbon pricing that internalizes the cost of pollution, some subsidies that can hedge the incremental cost, but at the demand side, because they have this lower incremental cost, you can find there more willingness to pay for climate-friendly products using climate-friendly materials. And that's where demand-side instruments, such as green public procurement, as you mentioned, or also embodied carbon targets for the buildings, they can provide clear targets for the phase-in of climate-friendly materials for buildings, for example. And at the same time, those instruments are interesting because, as we all know, subsidies like carbon credits for difference in times of financial budgets can be difficult to implement, and that's why they need to be complemented by other measures at the demand side. So it's important that governments take action to drive up demand for those materials, and that's why it's important to look at the lead market side. And I know that we'll go a bit more into this in discussion on what policy instruments are needed, but let me just add, on top of this, when we are implementing lean markets instruments, it's also important to take in consideration the social dimension. Policymakers still need to make sure that consumers are protected in parallel, low-income consumers in particularly, for example, by promoting social housing in construction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eleanor, for that great introduction to the topic and why it's important to have both the supply and demand side mechanisms. Now, if we can move back to Evita, put her on the screen again. I would love if, Evita, you could introduce a bit about Strength Latvia. What are your opportunities that you think that the market creation can bring for your company?
Thank you. Good afternoon once again. Absolutely, Schwenk Group in general and Schwenk Latvia. So we really consider sustainability in its, say, broadest scope. And so it's not only, of course, climate and environment, but also about social aspects and governance. Probably we have the privilege or an opportunity that we actually export most of our cement to northern European countries. So mainly our export markets are Sweden and Finland. And of course, we have, I think, already for quite some time considered Sweden as a beacon for green, be it public procurement, also private consumption, and sustainability efforts in general, again, in very broad context. So therefore, so we have already for many years taken into consideration the effort to diminish our say climate footprint, CO2 footprint, and currently, of course, same as other players in the industry, we are actively working on CCUS solutions, and we plan really from 2030 actually be able already to produce cement with captured CO2, at least to the very great extent, what technologies, of course, allowed at that particular point of time. But I would actually also even raise an unexpected perspective for this discussion, what even we consider to be green public procurement. I'm afraid that even though, of course, we live in one European Union, I'm afraid that in member states we have a totally different understanding, and we live in a different speed EU, I would say, in this context and in several other contexts. And for instance, if we look at Latvia, then actually you would be surprised, but green public procurement does not even consider emissions perspective. So impact on climate is not even considered. So green public procurement, in a way, is greenwashing even from the legal perspective. So it really considers just like a few items. So yes, life cycle perspective, some issues related to waste management, a couple of others like really environmental related. But if we want to consider climate, then this is left actually at the discretion of involved parties. And also, very unfortunately, when it comes to, for instance, construction, reconstruction, design, and demolition of buildings, first of all, green public procurement, even within this limited scope, covers only certain types of buildings and only from this year. And so these certain types of buildings then include, for instance, so like bigger buildings, buildings that have more than 6 floors. And so let's say that there are other elements which are taken into account. But again, so on the one hand, this regulation is binding. On the other, there are no effective sanctions, for instance, even for violation of these regulations. So thus, I would say we are in a very kind of starting point of even understanding, you know, like what green procurement really means and what it should embrace. And so we, as a company, and together with other stakeholders, different business organizations, we are actually the ones trying to push this public policy and legal framework to really encompass much broader understanding of first of all, green public procurement. But I would really want to go further than that. We should really promote sustainable public procurement, so that it also involves social and governance perspectives, that we really take into consideration human rights and other, let's say, social matters, as we are well aware what we actually, if we speak about the ESG, like broader perspective. So therefore, I think we really lack, we are in a lack of time, and we have to push these items at the EU level and also at the national level. I'm not even mentioning items like, for instance, monitoring and measuring the effects of these elements of public procurement. If we speak like about green public procurement, of course, again, there are member states, only a few of them, which indeed monitor these impacts, which calculate, let's say, the emissions and so forth. We have to speed up this process.
Thank you so much, Evita. From your intervention, I really take away two main points. One is the lack of harmonization across member states and the different uptake of green public procurement criteria, which is voluntary, as the Public Procurement Directive states right now. But I want to mention that Ursula von der Leyen actually proposed in her political guidelines for this political cycle a revision of the Public Procurement Directive, which ideally should tackle most of these issues that Evita mentioned. So, Eleanor, in your opinion, what should this revision include? Because we also know that lead markets creation, green public procurement is one of the steps. What is needed to make this revision holistic that considers the whole ecosystem of solutions?
Thank you, Irene. I think beyond the revision of the Public Procurement Directive, it's also important to consider the revision of the construction product regulation from last year that was already agreed on, that also includes sustainability requirements for green public procurement. So sustainability requirements as such will not be included by the revision of the Public Procurement Directive, but they already included, they were included in the previous legislation. But the issue is, and also with NZIA, we now have resilience criteria also for public procurement tenders. But the issue that we always find is what is happening at the legislative level and what is being implemented on the ground. On the ground, we find mostly municipalities that do not have the capacity to implement those requirements, either by lack of training, by lack of knowledge, by continuing with the current processes. Often the workers are not necessarily trained on the new requirements, or they're difficult to take into consideration. There are also existing contacts with public tenders that are easy to continue rather than creating new contacts and finding new tenders for these projects. So I would say the Public Procurement Directive can really help by trying to ease the process by providing more access to training, providing more access to easy information, targeted information. But also one thing that could be tested at the European level is maybe sandboxes for public procurement, so trying in different cities. And I know, and you have more knowledge on this actually, on the implementation of a green public procurement in certain cities, but there are innovative examples happening. So continuing with those more innovation sandboxes and learning from these could be interesting. So yeah, I would say ease administrative burden, more information sharing, and more training for municipalities.
Thank you very much. Evita, is there anything that you would like to add to this answer?
Yes, I completely agree to what was said, but I would still like to add this necessity to change the mindset of all of us. Because if we speak about construction, then of course we also have to take into consideration the change of even construction guidelines, what we need to build, how we need to build, why we need to build. And because this is, we live in a different world, we will continue to live in a different world. One thing is taking into consideration climate risks, but also, let's say, how we can build, but really with a much lower impact on climate. And we can't just think about, like carbon capture solutions, but we also have to think about, this whole way of living, and of course, building is part of that. And currently, so again, reflecting on my experience, I think in public procurement there is still this kind of thinking that price is the key issue. But we have to somehow really understand that we can't calculate everything in money today, because tomorrow, in any case, we will pay much more for not being able to think or change our mindset today. So, and this is what science says, of course, that if we don't act today, we will pay much more than we pay now, if we already pay a little bit more than just taking into consideration this short-term cost at this particular moment. And I think that this is really key, and therefore we need education, we need spreading of information, because again, there are different situations in different member states. And again, countries like Sweden or Netherlands are much different than countries like Bulgaria, Romania, or even the Baltic states. But we somehow have to level up and try to really inform the general public of the impacts of the climate change. And I think we still lack this, be it schools, be it public officials, be it politicians. We simply, somehow have to be able to spread the message.
And I think here that the EU has the role to play to kind of level the playing field between member states and ensure that the approach is harmonized, to also ease on the administrative burden for different procurement processes, because if every country has a different one, that's definitely a complicated issue. And I think, yeah, we've seen that indeed the costs of mitigation and adaptation will be much greater if we don't use public money to do this now. But well, we saw already with Eleanor's presentation that the increase in the cost in the final product, like which it will be the building in this case, is not that great. So I know that you did some research recently on the cost impact. So how do you think lead markets would actually impact the cost of housing?
Yeah, we just published a paper on how to set embodied carbon requirements in Germany, as this was agreed in the revision of the Energy Performance Directive last year. And we actually find that, so beyond what I presented earlier with the difference between the incremental cost on the material level and the product level, we find that although the cost at the material level can be quite high for 2030 and the medium term, in 2050, actually climate neutral materials can become cost competitive. And this is because of economies of scale, innovation, but also rising carbon prices through the ETS. And that applies, for instance, for primary steelmaking through hydrogen-based DR routes, but also concrete and cement through oxyfuels and CCS. Of course, this depends on other influencing factors such as carbon pricing, electricity prices, hydrogen prices, the capacity to store and capture storage. But in general, estimates tend to say, whilst the cost will increase marginally 2030, 2040, in 2050, we can have cost competitive materials. And then at the construction project level, it's always important to consider the other costs and have these in mind. We actually find that the material costs related, the material cost over the entire construction cost is only about 30%, a third. That's still quite important, but it's important to consider also the cost of land, the cost of capital, the cost of labor. And often when we talk to policymakers about regulations in the construction sector, they are understandably very cautious because this affects, all of us, because we all want to live in a home and all want to live under a roof. And understandably, when there are talks of costs being increased, it's very politically difficult. But it's important to take into consideration these costs are only 1/3, and there are a bunch of other costs that we also can also work on, not necessarily through climate policy, but labor policy or financial policy for the cost of capital. And let me just say also for the cost of green public procurement, you also have various studies showing that the implementation of green public procurement, there's one that came out recently from the Russell School of Governance, estimating that using climate-friendly steel or cement only increases the cost of the project by 0.2 or 0.5%. And that's an important argument to repeat in times of tight financial budgets.
Thank you very much. I want to turn now maybe the conversation back to a point that Evita raised before, and is that we cannot overly rely on CCS for decarbonization because the materials will not be available immediately, at least at scale that we need. So what are the other ways that we can reduce emissions from the cement and concrete in the meantime? And what is the industry preventing from making this shift? And what can the demand-side policies do to help in this case?
The question is for me, obviously. Yes. So of course, again, I can clearly speak mainly about cement industry on very practical terms. So there are mainly, let's say, three ways how to diminish or reduce emissions. So one was, of course, the involvement of new carbon capture technologies, and then ensuring that the whole value chain is operational. The second is, of course, trying to diminish the necessity for cement clinker, which is the product actually then creating most of emissions, or production of which creates most of emissions, meaning that, let's say, less clinker is then to be milled together with additional materials to produce cement, of course, at the same time, remembering that we have to ensure a certain quality, that the cement is a hydraulic binder necessary for many other construction materials. And of course, this is an ongoing work. So this is what we are also investing into significantly, testing out constantly. So really on daily basis, different ways and different materials, say how to substitute a certain amount of clinker in cement. And the third, which actually is the first and kind of the most used and let's say most known already for many years, is usage of fuels. So alternative fuels instead of fossil fuels. So for instance, in case of our plant in Latvia, so we have already reached substitution of fossil fuels with alternative fuels in the amount of 98%. So we basically use fossil fuels only for heating up the kiln. And by alternative fuels, I mean the so-called solid recovered fuels, so mainly fuels then produced from non-hazardous household or industrial waste. These are shredded tires, this is tire fluff, and different other materials. Again, in different regions, these can be different materials, but still the main material is the solid recovered fuel. So these are, I would say, the three main directions, let's say, how energy-intensive industries like ours, let's say, specifically if we speak about the cement industry, so these are the directions we are on daily basis indeed working for. But I would also like to add that indeed, so we have to make a business case for all of these solutions, because of course they involve significant costs, and therefore, again, as mentioned, so there is a special session devoted to carbon pricing, but really we have to make carbon pricing, let's say, much more non-beneficial than it is currently. Because currently still the carbon price, if we, let's say, compare it to the investments to be made in these solutions which would lead to climate neutrality, this is still not an easy game. So therefore, we have to create, let's say, these pieces of mosaic. So one is carbon pricing, another is from the demand side, public procurement, another one, taxation. Again, we have to really use all the taxes then applicable or imposed on, for instance, usage of natural resources. Because again, if we look at different member states, the situations are different. And for instance, if we look at Latvia again, currently taxation is not used at all for really promotion of certain behaviors of companies, of society at large. These are unused opportunities, and we have to still, we have so many opportunities to use them. And of course, financing as well. This is another tool. And we have to combine all of them in a way which really promotes certain behaviors and make business case for all these solutions we want to see implemented.
Finish with one last question for Eleanor, and then we'll open for questions for the audience. Now, recently you published this paper on creating lead markets for climate-friendly basic materials, and there you talk about a policy gap. Can you walk us a bit briefly through this policy gap, why we should address it, how we're going to address it?
Sure, and I don't know if it's possible to show one of the slides, although I don't know if the audience can see it really well. But in the paper, we look at the last slide, the third one, perfect. So we look at lead market instruments through basing steps, and these steps can also happen at the same time. It doesn't necessarily need to take up to 10 years before we have requirements on green public procurement. But just to categorize those instruments differently and understand why we need different policy instruments at the different steps. The first one is establishing a clear and marketable climate-friendly material product. And that relates a little bit to Evita's last comment on the innovations that are happening in terms of lowering the clinker ratio for cement, but also using alternative materials. The issue there on the regulation side is that product standards are usually quite prescriptive still currently, and there it's really important to move towards performance-based standards. And the revision of the construction product regulation includes this, but at the moment this hasn't been implemented. So it's really important that during the standardization process, the European Commission is pushing towards more performance-based standards to be able to allow for the use of products that could be more innovative and made through not following the conventional production routes. The second step, making environmental performance of materials and product visible. So there, what is important are requirements on the carbon accounting of the product and the reporting requirements. And there, a lot has been done already with the revision of the construction product regulation, the Eco-Design Directive, EPPD. So now we will have requirements on carbon accounting for the material level from ESPR and CPR, but also on the life cycle of the building. And that is really key because you cannot really reduce what you cannot measure. So the first step is understanding how can we measure it, how to then report it. But there, the gap also lies in further harmonization, because the way we report, the way we calculate those emissions can vary, both at the material level, but also at the building level. So it's very important that we harmonize this within the EU as a first step, but also ideally internationally as a second step. Third step, enabling consumers to make more climate-friendly choices, and their labels and certifications are key. There are some movement happening on the industry side in terms of label. The Wirtschaftsvereinigung für Stahl, so the German Steel Association, recently came out with a proposal for label for lower carbon steel. We still need to develop, we're still waiting for industry labels to be developed on the cement side, but also the basic chemical side. And it's important that those labels are then used in a consistent manner. Same goes for the reporting requirements. First at the EU level, ideally at the international level, because we're talking mostly about internationally traded goods. And finally, and this is why green public procurement comes in, setting targets for the use of those materials and those products. And there you don't only have green public procurement, you also have quotas that could be an interesting instrument depending on the final sector, carbon product requirements, pledging initiatives, financial initiatives, also embodied carbon limits. And there again, the last commission, well, the last legislation already moved a lot. As I mentioned before, we'll have requirements on green public procurements. We'll have requirements also on certain products for carbon product requirements. But it is really key there that the threshold is high enough to be able to scale up the market for key materials. And on financial incentives, there is still a lot to be done in terms of financial incentives for more circular construction practices, for example. And I'll stop it there.
Thank you very much. And now, if anyone have any questions for our panelists, please raise your hand.
Thank you. Samuele Ambrosetti from the Bio-Based Industries Consortium. Thanks for the presentation, both of you, very clear, very explicative. I just wanted to make sure that we have a common understanding of what we mean by decarbonizing and low carbon materials, because of course I get it for the reduction of emissions, for the energy sources, but then we also have the carbon embedded in materials, and we will always need carbon source. So a renewable carbon source can be from CCU, of course, from recycling, but also from bio-based renewable carbon. So I just want to make sure that and understand if this is taken into account in your scheme. Thanks.
Evita, maybe you want to take this, or?
Yeah, well, this is a very, very good question. In a way, I'm afraid that there should be, of course, these decisions should be taken really taking into consideration, let's say, different, lots of information, and by, let's say, business players, experts, like what exactly, we even consider as really low carbon material, or there, as I started with this green public procurement definition, whenever we have a definition, and we, especially when it comes to something, let's say, like a new term, then of course we have, unfortunately, still, like many ways of an interpretation of these specific terms. And also, what comes to my mind immediately is even these certification systems, how they are used, and how actually emissions are calculated there. And sometimes these certification systems, for instance, they certify processes, but actually they don't certify the products themselves. And there are, the deeper we go, the more complex the issue becomes. So I'm afraid there is no clear-cut answer to this question at this point of time. Probably, I'm really, let's say, sorry that I can't be in person with you today. I would really gladly, continue this discussion and already.
Of course. No, thank you so much. It is a complicated question, but I think what you mean, I want to also mention that in this case, I think we're coming from the cement and steel mostly angle. And in, for example, when it comes to carbon storage in products, that is not tackled by the CPR or ESPR, as Eleanor was mentioning, but it will be covered by the CRCF and in building products. And that is a different topic. We're not talking about, we're talking about emissions associated with the production of the products in this moment. So hope that answers your question. Maybe another question over there. We have 1 minute. So yes.
Thank you so much. So my name is Samuel. I work with ThyssenKrupp Steel, so German steel maker. I had 2 questions. One is on public procurement. In the current framework, we understand that one of the big barriers is actually the risk of litigation. So the procurement officers just stick to what they know, because going beyond that is very risky for them, because they are exposed. So I would be interested in your views on that. And then we, of course, very much agree that public procurement has a leading role to play when it comes to lead markets. But we also certainly see the need to go beyond public procurement, because to really drive the transformation and justify the huge investments that are needed, especially in the energy-intensive sectors, public procurement will not be enough. So I was also wondering if you had some views on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
I cannot say so much about the risk to litigation, but I think what it underlines is this need for more information sharing and more training on the procurement professional side. I know that Bellona has been doing some work more at the city level to also trying to bring together an alliance of public procurement professionals to be able to share, their experiences. And I think only through that, more information sharing, more training, more stakeholder alliances, can they realize, how to minimize the risks of litigation. Sorry.
Yeah, I would like to complement on that. I think maybe now the revision of the Public Procurement Directive will have a role to play on that, at least to increase transparency and ensure that these concerns are addressed in a holistic manner across sectors, I mean. And to the question of the going beyond the public procurement, I completely agree. I think especially for the steel sector, that's a really good example where, of course, the construction sector uses already mostly scrap steel, secondary steel for the construction, but we also need to decarbonize primary steel production. So I think maybe then we should look at automotive sectors and then see what they can do to procure low carbon. So maybe in electrical vehicles, or going even beyond to zero emission machinery to make it truly zero emission with procure clean steel as well. So. Yeah.
And I realize I missed the second part of the question, sorry. I think also for the automotive sector, agree, green public procurement can only do so much. What's interesting also to look at there is the potential of setting LCA limits on the car level. I know that there are discussions currently in Germany because there's still a lot of different methodologies on how to calculate whole life cycle emissions, so that's still an issue, and you first want to harmonize where you calculate and report, but in the future that could also be an interesting instrument as it's also more technology open rather than very prescriptive.
Well, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy the panels, and we are here for more questions later on during the break.
Thank you.
Thank you, Evita.
All right, thank you so much for that very insightful discussion. Lots of information to take in, and we're only halfway through the conference, but time flies when you're having fun. And now we're going to take a short break and recharge. We'll have 30 minutes for coffee, so please feel free to grab a drink, connect with each other, and stretch your legs. And also our comms team have set up a media corner at the back of the room, so if you would like to share your insights and your take on the conference, please find our team there, and we'll include you in the conference after movie. So I'll see you back here at 4:10. Thank you. Yes, please, I told Mark already. I'm very sorry to have to interrupt your discussions, but we should continue. Momentarily. Yeah. All right. All right, welcome back, everyone. I was very happy to see that there's plenty of lively discussions out there, so please feel free to continue those discussions after the event over at our office. Okay. Speakers are... Okay. All right. So welcome back, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the break and had a chance to recharge and connect with each other. Now we're ready to dive into the third panel discussion, which will focus on the topic of CO2 infrastructure deployment and its role in enabling industrial decarbonization. So we have an outstanding lineup here today who will share their insights and expertise on this topic. So join me in welcoming my colleague Michał Wondolowski, Senior Climate Technology and Policy Manager, who will moderate this panel. And we have joining us online Chris Bolesta, Secretary of State in the Ministry of Climate and Environment in Poland. In the meantime, you can climb the stage. Dr. Daniel Kicia, Investment Policy Officer in DG Klima at the European Commission, and Isabel Rikpost, Secretary General at the European Seaports Organization. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Good afternoon. I hope you've enjoyed the conference as much as I have. So many of you will know that carbon capture and storage is a topic that has been quite important for Bellona, and I think arguably Bellona was the first environmental NGO to have understood and supported the role of CCS in climate change mitigation. In fact, we've been doing that since the early 90s, at least in Norway. Maybe just to set the stage, it's good to see that CCS is experiencing a bit of a revival after the first failed attempt to get CCS projects some 10 to 15 years ago. And this is closely connected to the fact that we need to start thinking more seriously about decarbonizing heavy industry. So CCS doesn't come out of nowhere. It's actually closely related to this topic. And it's good to see that the topic of industrial decarbonization is finally getting the attention that it needed badly. And that's rightly so, because heavy industries represent around 20% of of our emissions. And we will need this growing consensus that we will need carbon capture and storage to deal with process emissions from some of the industrial sectors. Cement and lime are classic examples, but we can also think of some targeted application of CCS in other industrial sectors, in steel, in chemicals, ammonia. You can think also of sectors like waste to energy or hydrogen production in some cases. This is something that we at Bellona have been advocating for, as I said, for here in Brussels 30 years and in Oslo more than 30 years, almost 40 years. And for CCS to happen, it's quite obvious that industrial sites need to install capture units. But there is much more than capture units that need to happen. To give you a bit of a sense of what's needed, let me quote some numbers. So up to 7,000 kilometers of CO2 pipelines in Europe alone, at a cost of between 6 to 20 billion euro, as estimated by the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. Up to 50 million tons of CO2 storage capacity, and even up to 50 CCS, 50 CO2 ships that we will need, and all this only by 2030, which is only in 6 years. And these numbers multiply many times if we think of the horizon of 2050. So the challenge is immense, and we're effectively creating a new value chain with storage sites, pipelines, CO2 terminals, ships, and CCS projects that are spanning multiple countries. So we can actually imagine having carbon captured in countries like the Netherlands, France, Poland, or Latvia, which is then transported and stored in a completely different geography, sometimes hundreds of kilometers away from the capture site. And this kind of infrastructure requires substantial upfront investments. It requires a regulatory framework, network planning and coordination between operators, sometimes even at the EU level, so not necessarily inside one country. De-risking and financing mechanisms, both at the EU level and national level. And we as Bellona are proud to be contributing to this work. We are part of the Industrial Carbon Management Forum, where we are co-chairing the working group on CO2 infrastructure, which builds on our long-standing contribution to this issue through such platforms as the Zero Emissions Platform, CCS Europe. multiple research and capacity building projects that we've done as Bellona, as well as events and publications on CCS. One of the landmark publications that we did together with other partners is the CCS ladder on how to apply CCS in a targeted way, keeping the climate benefits at the core. So this year and even last month, we've seen many promising and encouraging developments in CCS. On the policy side, we've seen the European Commission publishing the Industrial Carbon Management Strategy, the Net Zero Industry Act, and a game-changing CO2 injection target. And on the project side, many things have happened this year as well. Maybe just to mention things that happened in September. Early September, Porthos celebrated the beginning of the construction work in Rotterdam. We have the CCS hub in Ravenna that has also kicked off. And last week, the CCS terminal in Norway, in Øygarden, the Northern Lights terminal, celebrated the completion of the construction work and the first shipment of CO2. So this is really happening. All of this is very encouraging, but there is much, much more than we need to do. To discuss this fascinating topic, I have a really good panel, and I'm really glad that we managed to get such amazing panelists. I will start introducing them in alphabetic order. So Chris Bolesta, who is with us online, is a former official of the European Commission and currently Secretary of State in the Polish Ministry of Climate and Environment. Chris's career in policymaking and administration goes far back, from 2000, basically from year 2000, Chris has worked in the European Commission. He was also a member of the political cabinet of the two Polish ministers of environment. During his time at the Polish government, he supported the accession negotiations and Poland's adaptation to EU requirements in the areas of energy and research and development. Chris negotiated the second European energy and climate package and served as advisor to the president of COP19. And outside of the governmental sector, Chris Bolesta worked as research director at one of the most influential analytical centers in Poland, Polityka Insight. And he is also was co-founder and vice president of the non-governmental organization, the Electric Vehicle Promotion Foundation. But many of you today know Chris for his work in Brussels. He has been a long-standing champion of CCS, having led the CCS policy team at DG Ener and initiating the CCS Forum, which is today known as the Industrial Carbon Management Forum, and being one of the key architects of the EU Industrial Carbon Management Strategy. So welcome, Chris. Thanks for joining us. Then we have Daniel Kicza, who is a member of the European Commission team at DG Klima, supporting the transition of the European industrial economy through low-carbon solutions. Daniel works in a team that helps financing and de-risking low, zero, and net negative carbon projects, including CCS projects. And Daniel is also very well known in the CCS universe, having played an instrumental role on behalf of DG Klima, among other things, in setting the famous CO2 injection target in the Net Zero Industry Act, which has been, as I said, a game changer for the European industrial carbon management policy. So great to have you with us, Daniel. Welcome. And last but not least, Isabel Rigbost, Secretary General of ESPO, the European Seaports Organization. Since Isabel has been Secretary General of this organization since 2013. And before taking up this function, Isabel had been working in EU public affairs for almost 20 years, including a short period at DG Agri at the European Parliament and as director of the European Federation of Inland Ports. And I'm particularly happy to have Isabel with us today, as she's representing a sector which we at Bellona believe is going to be crucial for the success of CCS. So I'm looking forward to hear your insights, Isabel. Now on to the actual panel discussion. I want to start with Daniel. So, DG Klima and you personally, Daniel, have played a major role in designing the industrial carbon management policy of the EU. I mentioned the ENZIA, the injection target, but maybe I'd like to let you explain what have been DG Klima's recent activities in this field, but also what do you see coming in the coming months, and in particular in the area of storage. What do you think should be prioritized? What are the roadblocks, and how do you think we should address, or how these should be addressed? Over to you.
Thank you, Michael. That's an enormously wide question. First of all, happy birthday, Bellona, and thanks for having us on this panel.
Thank you.
It's easy for me to be on the panel because my boss was here in the beginning, so all clear what I can say and what I can't say. Very happy to be on a panel with Chris. And indeed, yeah, I had some penholder role in the strategy, and that was a lot of fun. I think in terms of what we have done in the last year, you mentioned it all already. So I would rather look into what we are currently doing and what will be the next steps. And indeed, so I'm working in the team that runs the Innovation Fund and the Modernization Fund. So it will not surprise you if I have 3 implementation tasks to report that we are working on. One is indeed Innovation Fund projects. There is a number of Innovation Fund projects which are next year in a situation where they need to take investment decisions, and they are looking for storage sites and for storage contracts. Of the famous 10, 11 million tons that we have under grants already, captured CO2 that is, this is 4.6 million tons. And here we are with them on implementing their projects. And this is something which is very important for us because we have here the chance to create really full value chains, meaning someone who captures, someone who transports, and someone who stores, and this within this decade. So in the context of the Net Zero Industry Act, also a strategic project under the Net Zero Industry Act. So that's something which we are spending a lot of time on. The second implementation is the Net Zero Industry Act itself, specifically Chapter 3. So that's the CCS chapter in the Net Zero Industry Act. Today is the deadline for member states to notify to us the oil and gas production values, which is the bottom line, the basic data that we need to identify what will be obligated entity eventually. Yeah, so we have to identify those entities. Personally, I believe most of them already know who they are and because of their values. We also have the task in the next couple of months to define the rules for the de minimis threshold that is in the Net Zero Industry Act, meaning which companies will be exempted from the outset because they have only very little amounts of production. That's a process, it's ongoing. We had a first discussion with member states already, and we strive to have the relevant delegated regulation ready by Q1 next year, so that companies have certainty. And then the third is indeed implementing the ICM strategy. So the tasks, the bullet points that the Commission intends to do. Now we have a new Commission. We find that they are nicely represented in the mission letters of the Energy Commissioner and the Climate Commissioner. So there are a number of activities that from a DG Klima point of view we're working on. To name a few, so we're preparing for the aggregation platform that we have announced, which is a measure to, in the future, help smaller emitters to aggregate CO2 volumes and then maybe also create a market to trade CO2 volumes to storage operators. We're also preparing the knowledge sharing platform where we have some experience in the Innovation Fund, but we want to broaden this to any project that is working on these technologies. This is something which will come also early next year with Horizon, with the new Horizon work program. And then last but not least, we want to kickstart also with Horizon, the work on the investment storage atlas. That's an important activity from our point of view, even though we still need to have sort of storage sites permitted now, and we have the NZIA target, but we need to look at the 2030, 2040 time frame where we need a lot more storage sites. And this is an important work that we want to kick off. And then maybe this is all sort of future work on our desks. Just a sneak peek in how we see the economy around us at this moment. One way of looking at it is the National Energy and Climate Plans, which had to be submitted in final this summer and were submitted in draft before. And after draft, I think many of you worked on bringing CCU projects or CCUS projects to more to the awareness of member states. Just a recap, in the drafts, we had 12 member states who have dedicated chapters and measures in their national energy and climate plans. Now we have only a few. We have 9 of 27 possible final plans submitted, so some are outstanding. But of the 12 countries that had CCUS aspects, 6 have already submitted. And what we see is that even though in the drafts, the estimation for captured CO2 that will be looking for storage sites in 2030 was around 30 million tons, now we have only half of the member states with their final plans, and we already see it 36 million tons. So we see that this is growing, and we see the same trajectory in the applications to the Innovation Fund, which the latest results of the latest calls will be announced around the 22nd of August. So that's another important indication for us that we will indeed need to look at storage sites. And so the challenge here is really for these front-runner companies to take investment decisions outside their comfort zone, I would say, to take more risks than they usually would take in an environment that is less charted, more uncharted, both in permitting, but also in actual execution of projects. And this will be in a very important and crucial year, 2025, in this regard. So maybe I stop here, and I'm very happy to discuss any of that.
Thank you. So your plate is full, and it's good to see the Commission trying to assist those projects to matchmake a bit between the capture projects with storage projects. So the aggregation platform, the knowledge sharing platform, the Atlas, all this hopefully will help different capture projects to find home for captured carbon. And hopefully member states will also follow suit and live up to their plans in the energy and climate plans. So now over to Chris. So after leading work on CCS at DG Ener, you came back to Poland as Secretary of State in the current government. And while we can just imagine how much is on your plate, all the challenges that Poland has in terms of decarbonizing its economy, we very much hope that you continue to champion and advocate for CCS deployment in Poland and beyond. So can I ask you, what is your vision for industrial carbon management in Poland, or indeed in Europe? And are you planning any specific activities from the government side? Chris.
Thanks a lot, and hello everyone. Sorry, I couldn't travel to Brussels this time, but I'm so happy that I finally can join a CCS discussion, because you know, as Michal said, that there's a lot of things going on, and CCS is just part of my responsibilities. But yes, I jumped from CCS while in the Commission to State Secretary role, so that gives you an idea how important CCS policy is. This is a great window for all of you working on CCS. And thanks, Michal, for taking us on the sentimental journey. And happy birthday to Bellona. I remember when I started in DG Ener, and we had a meeting on CCS, and and the assistant told us, oh, there's an NGO people came for, you know, for discussions on CCS, and we in my team we were like, okay, another NGO against the CCS. This is it will be a difficult meeting. And then, you know, a couple of guys from an NGO saying, oh, you're not doing enough on CCS. We were like really astonished by this. So you know, you were really starting to make new ground in Brussels with your approach on CCS. I will not tell you what my vision for you know, industrial carbon management for Europe is, because, you know, Daniel and me, we wrote the thing with our team, so so this is our vision. But I can tell you what we are doing in Poland, because it's the landscape is changing really fast. Yesterday, I discussed with Polish cement industry what they need and how they want to decarbonize, because it's I believe cement industry is customer number one in terms of industrial carbon management, and I think that there's no doubt about this. And we are in a situation where first we are gathering stakeholders to create something similar to the European Industrial Carbon Management Forum. We want to do something similar in Poland. I know from experience that it worked really well. So we want to you know, copy the design and also want to engage the stakeholders, give them some ownership in developing the strategy in Poland. We started nurturing the projects. We have one successful project under the Innovation Fund. We have one on the CEF list. And you know, now we need more. And there are more in development. We want to help them write applications. We want to work with them, show them what kind of opportunities exist in Europe. So this is a stream that is very important to me, because it's these projects need help at European level as well. We also sketching out strategy. We are sketching out industrial carbon management strategy. Towards the end of this year, we'll have a first sketch, and then in the few coming months of next year, we want to finalize the strategy. Of course, in parallel, we already know that the major hurdle for projects and the major piece on our plate is regulating the infrastructure. So we want to cooperate with the Danish presidency. Poland will start the presidency next year in January, and then the Danish will come. So we want to cooperate on maybe organizing some discussions already on the infrastructure, CO2 infrastructure, regulatory needs. We know that we need to already start some legislative work in Poland, because this is something of crucial importance. Stakeholders flag this very often. I was surprised that many say that funding can be organized, but we need regulation on transport. So this is priority number one for us, and we know that we need to move with this very fast. And I mentioned support schemes. We are looking into designing a pilot carbon contracts for different mechanisms in Poland. So these are the 5 points that we are 5 elements of our actions.
That's great to hear. So there's a Polish forum coming, sketching the strategy for industrial carbon management, potentially funding instruments. So it's really good to see that you are indeed championing CCS back in Poland. So now moving on to Isabel. So Isabel, you're a bit new to this world, I suppose. CCS deployment and in particular CO2 transport, will rely on multiple modes of transport. So you will often hear about pipelines, but there will also be, shipping, maritime shipping of CO2, and consequently, this will require the involvement of ports. When talking about ships, you can't not talk about ports. And we have seen different levels of engagement by ports in the CCS sphere. There are some ports who are actually taking the lead and leading CCS projects, creating CCS hubs. Some of them limit the role to just sort of letting part of the port space to be used for CO2 terminals, and arguably a lot of ports don't really have much knowledge about CCS. But do you notice in your membership, do your members notice that CCS is potentially becoming a new business opportunity, not only a climate action sort of activity, but also a business opportunity for ports? Are your members open to this new value chain? And if they were to engage in CCS, what would they need to play a bigger role, and what are the barriers?
Okay, thank you. Again, a long question, but let me also first say happy birthday. And I realized that our organizations have the same age, so I think it's good to see that. And it's also, as you said, Michael, for us this is a new environment in a way. Maybe it shouldn't be, but lately we see that ports are involved in many things. We go in many new areas of energy, of course, industry, also unfortunately military preparedness. I mean, so our field of activity is becoming wider and wider. So it's if you can do that, you can't do without ports. If you do that, you can't do without ports. So it seems ports are needed. So that's important. And it's true that if you ask me, have ports CCS on their agenda, I would say yes, a few ports, as you know, and you mentioned it, and probably this afternoon, or it's mentioned Rotterdam, Antwerp, etc. But Ravenna, you told. So I see it now mainly more in the north than in the south. But there might be developments there as well. France is also getting into it with Europa. So it's something that is evolving, and maybe it has been evolving a bit slow because there was the perception, is CCS enough to reach our decarbonization goals? Is that thing to do? And I think that was a bit in general some hesitation about CCS. Now we see that, for instance, the Port of Antwerp is saying with that our industrial emissions can be halved by 2030, so we need to do that. But then it's asking, what do you need, and what is important for ports in this whole development of CCS projects. And there I hear from the ports that are being involved is that it's important that there is a framework, a legislative framework, an internal market, some rules for the whole union. But these rules should also not be too strict, since it's a market, if we call it a market, I mean, yeah, a value chain that is under development. A lot of players in this value chain are testing things, so you mentioned it, they have to dare to go in there, and so if then you regulate it in detail, it might be too quick to really have this straitjacket, if it would be the aim to have a straitjacket. For instance, also if you talk about the quality of the CO2 to the standard, it's good to have a standard, but also there maybe have a balanced view, because otherwise no one will participate into the system, or it will be a lot more difficult for players or for industry to go into the system. The second thing is, for ports, it's something that we, I think that everyone and society also has to understand is that all these activities take space. And if there is something that is difficult in Europe and in Europe sports, it's space. And this is an important message of acceptance that we will have to share or to explain to society, to port city people, etc., that if you want to go towards this green transition, towards decarbonization, you will need to have the space, to provide the space, and hence also see that we get, or we, I mean that the ones who want to go into these projects get the permits, because otherwise you cannot advance on that. And that is very important, because what we see is, and that is sometimes very difficult, not only with CCS, but with all the like the provision of new energies in ports, etc. We made as ESPO a study on that. We commissioned a study, for instance, hydrogen. You need 5 times the space of normal fossil fuels to have the value chain of hydrogen. I mean, so this is something to voice that this whole greening, if you want to play a role in value chain as port for CO2 and transport of CO2, you will have to adapt a key to this commodity, let's say. So this has to happen, and this is sometimes difficult to explain. The third thing is what is very important is, of course, investments and budget. The business case is not there fully, so you will have to help in moving, in getting these projects through, and there we will rely as ports on also the continuous support, budgetary support, of course, for the industries and the players, because this is also what are we? Port authorities are managers of land, are facilitators, are matchmakers, but they are not the players themselves into too many. They are not the industries. So, and they are probably also not the players or the Air Liquide or whoever is active in that. But a lot now is speaking also in the mission letters about de-risking investments. But there, I think that this de-risking shouldn't be limited only to the private sector, let's say, but maybe also to investors, because the ports will put their investments as well, that they get enough support from banks as well, etc. And I think the last point, and then I stop here, is what is important is that there is a long-term stability on how CCS is being seen, how CCS is being supported, because it's not something you do for tomorrow. I mean, you can materialize tomorrow, develop tomorrow, so it's long-term. And it's very important to convince investors, to convince players, to convince ports to go into this business, let's say, to have a certain stability. That there is no start-stop, that it's not like in a few years' time there is a complete new view on how CCS is or how good or CCS. That would be not good for such a technology, let's say.
Okay, thank you. So long-term stability with regards to the role of CCS in climate change mitigation, yes. De-risking of investments, permitting societal acceptance in the communities around ports to allow for more space in ports to be taken up by CO2 infrastructure, and standards that should be there but should also be not too prohibitive.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe just one thing to add, because you said, are all the ports active on it, or do they look at CCS? I think this is not, that shouldn't be the purpose. I mean, of course, because the roles ports are very diverse in Europe. Some are just lifelines, island, mainland, etc., with a few ferries in size, in geography. So it will mainly be the ports who have a role to play in helping the industries around to decarbonize, let's say. That will be the major role. Of course, there could be a role where ships are trying to capture CO2 from the ship and then bring it on land, let's say, or whatever, or find a solution to the way to storage. But the main thing at this moment will be for these heavy, hard to abate sectors.
Thank you. Okay, I would like to ask the audience, if there are any questions to our panelists? I don't see any raised hands. Is there anything online? Not that I know. So maybe I can follow up with a question. So was there anything online or? No? Okay. Then a question, Daniel, maybe to you. With regard to the storage, what do you see as the most important steps to implement this target by 2030, the storage target in the NZR?
Thank you. I think the most important step is to bring the value chain together. I mean, everybody needs to de-risk their investments. The best you can do that is with customers and long-term customers. There is the Innovation Fund projects. Chris mentioned the one in Poland, which is part of what I was talking about. We also have a project that is already expanding the port of Antwerp in order to export CO2 to storage sites in the North Sea region. So in that sense, industries are moving, the emitters are moving, and they would like to, from what we see, they would like to move faster. And now we need to have storage contracts. We need to have a common coming together between storage operators and these emitters. And as I mentioned it already, I think it's not to be underestimated how much sort of out of the comfort zone, meaning usual corporate risk-taking attitudes and so on, these kind of projects really are, even if they are supported by the Innovation Fund, even if they are maybe mandated by the Net Zero Industry Act, still you need to make sure that you have a business case. And I think what we need is to have these first projects showing the way, in a way. They are sort of front runners, as we call them. They are also pilots in a way for the much bigger investments that need to be taken. And maybe just a little bit reassurance to you. The modeling that we have done next to the carbon management strategy shows that by 2040 we would need to have 250 million tons being stored, and that's something which is a very tall order. But much of that needs to be done offshore, and the emitters are not offshore; they are onshore. So the ports will become a really important connector to these things.
Thank you. Okay, actually, I think that's encouraged the audience to ask questions. I think you were first. If you could introduce yourself.
Yep.
And
Hi everyone, Fabio Paretti, CWAP, European Waste to Energy sector. So very nice panel, and glad to be here. Chris, well, glad to see you. You don't. I think you don't see me, but I was fascinated to one thing that you said about the pilot in Poland you would like to develop about carbon contract for difference. And I think these are very good tools, and I'm also, I have to say, a bit jealous when I look at the UK that they are quite advanced in these type of schemes compared to the EU. So also in terms of, maybe it's an open question, or also for the Commission, or as a strategy, as a legacy of the strategy that we had in February, when and if we'll be able to see carbon contract for difference at EU level. I know the EU started with hydrogen auctions. I have to admit, from an industry perspective, that the Innovation Fund, it's complicated, is difficult, because we have to admit it's oversubscribed. The budget is consistent but limited, and this can also reduce investments. So maybe having an incentive for every ton of CO2 emitted, having a return directly could be more effective to stimulate investment in CCUS.
Thank you, and let's take the second question now, and I'll let the panelists respond after that.
So much. My name is Robert Jekyll with ArcelorMittal Steel Industry. Linking up to your question, what we see is innovation fund, all great, and that you're going to start that, fantastic, you need that, and to kick it off, of course. What we see for other decarbonization technologies, by the way, hi Chris, and that innovation fund is not a solution by itself. You need to have investments for large-scale investments, a business case for that. You need to shape that. So question one is, okay, you kick it off like this. Beyond that, how are you going to do this investment case for large-scale investments? Because you cannot rule this only by the innovation fund. And then secondly, what we really like as industry, I think cement as well, is, you know, there is going to be a huge shortage of money in Europe. On the other hand, we have seen a big push for decarbonization investments and criteria. What the EU is always very good at is setting targets, but not so good to get there. What we want is, as industry, we can pay our own decarbonization. But you need to do this, like in the Draghi report, with the ETS earmarking. And I think this is a brilliant instrument also for this technology, also for other decarbonization technologies to do. But Daniel and Chris, we need for that ASAP some guidelines how to do that as industry. So can you say if you support that, and I hope that you support also the Draghi report to get this in that new, I think it's also in the missions somehow for the new commission. But can you develop all those, so that's those guidelines for ETS earmarking? So that is two concrete questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Very short answers, please, if that's possible.
Maybe first to Chris, because most of the ETS revenues are in the hands of member states. What we have is innovation fund, and we heard it's not enough. So Chris, maybe you give it a go, and then I come in.
Easy question. It's like, you know, implementing NZIA at the member state level. Directors coming up to me saying, who wrote this thing? Now we have to implement this. And I say, well, I don't know. But that was a joke on NZIA. In terms of earmarking the revenues, I agree with you, Daniel. You know, this is a decision of member states, and I had exactly the same question yesterday during the cement meeting, and they asked me, okay, we should do some action at European level because we need money from EU ETS. This is a discussion every member state needs to do internally, and I do what I can, but every discussion with finance minister is always very difficult, and there's usually one winner. So, but I'll keep on trying. I'll keep on trying. In terms of the innovation fund, Daniel will obviously speak longer, but I'll just say this: we'll do whatever we can from the Poland's point of view to advocate for continuation and growing of the innovation fund, because this is today, which I find quite perverse, that this is the only tangible element of European industrial policy. We need more, and it's a good start, but certainly we need more.
Yeah, that's easy to pick up on this because there are a couple of innovations in the innovation fund this year and in the next years. And the primary example I would like to mention here is auction as a service. You have seen that in our first pilot auction for renewable hydrogen, the German government committed money in order to then support projects that would not be able to be supported by us, but then are in Germany. So it's a service for member states to pick up projects that have done enormous amounts of work, sometimes to apply and to show themselves as serious projects. We are developing the same thing with what we call grant as a service. Same idea here. It will start already this autumn. Some of you might be aware of the STEP regulation, which is an overarching sort of financing framework, What it essentially means is that in the Innovation Fund, the results that I said will be announced later this month. There will be very lucky ones that get a grant from the Innovation Fund, but there will be also a category that we call seal project. So they will get a seal of excellence, if you want, a step seal actually it's called, because we have evaluated them as being as good as the others to be worthy of EU Innovation Fund support, but not, unfortunately, not as good as the others. So that's why they are ranked lower. And that's something which we believe is also a support for member states, because then your colleagues, finance minister, they can decide upon real projects with real people working in them and real sort of plans to decarbonize, whether they want to finance this. And we look specifically, of course, with STEP is aimed at other bodies of other frameworks of EU funds like structural funds, etc. And this will be a very interesting pilot. When it comes to the question from the Waste Incinerator Association, we are looking into this. I think we have said it before. H2 is the first pilot, was the pilot auction. We just launched the terms of reference yesterday for the next round of this. The interest in the Commission is very much into hydrogen, because hydrogen is very versatile and needed in many sectors. And we will be looking with a study into what are the next potential topics that could be run with an auction. Again, here, we need to look into whether captured CO2 is like captured CO2, like captured CO2, in order to have a comparable commodity that would actually be part of this. That's part of the homework that I think we together somehow need to do. It's hard to do that when there are no capture plants operating. So that's where we think that the next two years, when the capture plants start operating, or at least have their investments ready to do so, will bring new insights into this discussion. So maybe I stop here. Of course, very happy to hear that Poland is for keeping the Innovation Fund running. That's music to our ears, of course.
Great. Thanks a lot to my
I
panelists.
wanted to add two things, if I may.
2 seconds.
Hello, Robert, and hello, Fabio. That's it.
You want to add something? Okay, just saying hello.
Yes, I was just saying hello, Fabio, and hello, Robert. It's good to hear from you.
Okay, on this note, thanks a lot. Very nice insights. Please join me for a round of applause to the panel. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. Not to worry, the conversation on ETS revenues will continue in the next panel. So thank you so much for the panelists for the great discussion. Now we're going to move on to our fourth and final session of the day. We will be exploring the business case for industrial decarbonization. This session will focus on how effective carbon pricing mechanism can support low carbon manufacturing. After this panel, we'll hear closing remarks from Jonas Hellset, our director of Bellona Europa, who will reflect on today's discussions and offer some final thoughts as we wrap up the conference. But for now, let's welcome Francesco Lombardi, policy advisor at Bellona Europa, who will be moderating the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Hope you can hear me. Welcome to this last session of today. I hope your minds are still awake and clear, because we have a very nice conversation coming up. Unfortunately, we're a bit short on time, so also to the panelists, we will have more or less half an hour to discuss the next topic. This last session of the conference will be on carbon pricing. And carbon pricing is an instrument that has been gone through a lot of changes during time. And especially in the past legislation, we saw major changes, especially the ETS reform. With this, we saw the linear reduction the ETS allowances will go down to 0 by 2040, more or less. Plus, we also saw the introduction of the carbon border adjustment mechanism, so the CBAM, which will cover 6 sectors, which are cement, iron and steel, aluminium, hydrogen, electricity, and fertilizers. I'm very happy I didn't forget any of them. And by doing that, it will allow the phase out of free allowances under the ETS and leveling the playing field between goods produced in the EU and the goods produced abroad and imported into the EU. So these and many other reforms, of course, made up the Green Deal, and there have been a lot of, we can say, sort of contraposition between competitiveness on one hand and decarbonization on the other hand, and these two were seen as one against the other. Whereas this is not really what, at Bellona at least, what we think is the right narrative, because we think that the Green Deal and the reform of the ETS and CBAM sets the condition for a sort of race to the top for EU industries becoming leaders of low carbon production, and it might create the condition for the greenest product to be the most competitive around the world. But there is a long way to go. So in these sessions, we will talk about these and we'll try to answer to open questions that we have. So this session will be a dialogue between a representative of the industry and a representative of civil society, especially NGOs. And we know that sometimes they're not really on the same side, but they might also be. Why not? So let's see how that goes. And we'll try to look at the challenges that we have had, different views, common way forward. We will talk about effectiveness of the EU ETS to decarbonize EU industries. The revenues, we touched upon that in the panel before. So we'll try to see the space that we'll have from that, and then we also try to go beyond the European Union and see how this relates to the international scene. So with no further ado, a big applause for Lydia Tamellini, expert on EU industrial decarbonization at the Carbon Market Watch, and Rob van der Meer, Industrial Policy Director at Semburo. Okay, well, welcome. So let's kick off. We mentioned the new scenario of carbon pricing, so with ETS reform, introduction of the CBAM, and I would like to know from both of you, maybe Lydia, you can start, what would be the role of the EU ETS in decarbonizing industry, specifically those sectors that will be covered by the CBAM?
Thank you so much for this very, very difficult question, although exciting. Well, I'll start, of course, thanking you and Bellona for the invite to today's panel. We're very happy that we're able to participate in the conversation, especially on such an important topic that is really the focus of our work at Carbon Market Watch. Starting from what you said, the latest reform, we were quite satisfied with what the reform brought, right? It's a really, really big change, a lot of steps forward to what the situation was before. And of course, I do believe that the new phase of the ETS and the CBAM will be essential in delivering industrial decarbonization. We'll start with the most obvious feature, right? The gradual phase out of free allocation. So what we know, and this has been confirmed from several voices, the European Court of Auditors, even by the Draghi report itself, that the ETS was successful in delivering decarbonization to some extent. It was successful for the power sector. Of course, we cannot consider that the ETS acted in a void. There were many other policies that interacted with the ETS and managed to bring the power sector to the successful, into the successful trajectory that is living now. However, we do believe this one feature of the ETS was really essential in delivering this. Since 2013, the power sector is almost fully paying the carbon price. And this is quite a different situation for the industry, for heavy industry. And so the different trajectories that we've seen is that the power sector has been significantly delivering in decarbonization,
The aviation, on the other hand, has been increasing their emission, and the industry has slightly managed to deliver a small decrease in CO2 emission. However, part of it is also to be attributed to lessened production rather than less carbon intensity of the products that are delivered. So clearly, what we would like to see is how the industry will react to the gradual exposure to the carbon price. This is important, firstly, to respect the polluters pay principle. CO2 is a cost. CO2 is a cost that has been externalized, and we need to internalize. We're here for a reason. We're here to a climate action conference, so we can't pretend this is only a matter of industrial competitiveness. There's a quite bigger issue that we need to tackle, and it's urgent to tackle, and we need to make sure that we reduce the amount of CO2 we produce. This is essential. And we need to remember also that the ETS is primarily an emission reduction policy tool. So we need to treat it as such. Our priority is to use it so we lessen the production of CO2. So we need to remember that when we think of CCS, when we think of carbon removals, when we need of several other technology options that we are presented. We need primarily to emit less CO2 with the production that we have available now. So of course, what we ask industry and policymakers now is to respect the phase-out timeline that we have agreed upon, we just agreed upon, and to make sure that this goes hand in hand with the implementation of the CBAM. Indeed, the CBAM is a complex instrument. This has been highlighted also by the Draghi report. There are worries and challenges that we need to tackle, this we know. However, we do not think that the challenges that could be posed by the CBAM should entail slowing down the phase of timeline that we agreed upon. This is important. The challenges that Draghi foresees are of several types. Of course, we see there are some gaps. There are some potential for circumvention. These are issues that we can solve from a regulatory perspective. There's a lot of actors that already are at work, that have been at work for the past year at least, to identify those gaps. So we are able to at least solve some of them before we start with the actual pricing in 2026. There's issues that have been well explained with per-consumer scrap, for example. I know there's also potential circumvention issues with the clinker content in cement. And this is something that we're very willing to discuss, and we need to be very aware if we want to properly implement the CBAM. However, the CBAM is essential not only to allow European industry to really phase into full carbon pricing, but also to nudge the rest of the world into further climate action. We strongly promote the CBAM as also a climate diplomacy instrument to make sure that further carbon pricing is implemented in other areas of the world. It is important if several regions and countries have their own domestic carbon pricing system that can be adapted to their needs and where the revenues can be kept within the country or region. Yeah. I will stop just.
Yeah. Okay, Rob, please.
Yeah. A long talk, and that's not it easy. But I first wanted to say something about Bellona. Bellona is now 30 years old in Brussels. I'm involved in the discussions with Bellona. I was just checking 12 or 13 years. And to be honest, that is always has been fun, sometimes quite difficult fun, but at least that is the most important point for me, and perhaps that is one of the backgrounds of this whole discussion for the cement industry. It is one of the few NGOs, green NGOs, that is understanding that in cement you have process emissions. And when you have process emissions, when you produce cement, you have CO2 being produced somehow from the process emission, from the limestone. You can't escape. You have to do something with that CO2. Now, that is an introduction why I am happy that I'm here, and I'm glad that I was invited for this meeting and for this dialogue. Thank you. So that is the first point. Second, I'm here for CEMBRO, the Cement Association, the European Cement Association. We released in May this year an updated roadmap, and that roadmap is aiming at targeting net zero cement production in 2050. And that brings me to one of the points that I wanted to highlight in this discussion after what you said. 2050, net zero 2050, not 2040. Perhaps we will be 1 year earlier, I don't know, 1 year later, but not 2040. We have to convert about 200 installations in Europe in the next 25 years, 8 each year. There is only one installation starting up this year, and that had 20 years development times. 20 years that we needed for development of carbon capture and storage. 20 years from 2005, and it will run in 2025. So 2005 to 2025. So a long time. That's important. Now a little bit about the carbon pricing, because that was the target. And that brings me again to that 2050 issue. The EU ETS ends with its allocations, not the free allocations, but allocations, somewhere 2039, 2040. Cement industry will not be at net zero in 2040. I can't help it. Daniel, take it into your pocket. We try to be as fast as possible, but it is not 2040. I can guarantee you that. Because it means that we have to build 12 installations a year and not 8. And 12 is completely out of order. So we have to have solutions for it. Now to the carbon pricing itself. The CO2 costs for the decarbonization of the cement industry, we are talking not about a few billions. We are about, for Europe, talking about hundreds of billions of euros that we will need from now till 2050. The major part, I would say half of it, will be needed for the operational cost. CO2 transport, CO2 storage, alternative fuels, energy, all that. A lot of money, but that's operational cost. Another part will be needed for the EU ETS. The good news is we are going down in the EU ETS. So we are going to net zero in 2050. So when you look at the total amount of CO2 that is to be accounted for in the EU ETS will go down fast. But the price of CO2, I don't know what it will do, but might go up. Anyhow, the EU ETS benefit, or the EU ETS benefit for the countries, we talked about that with Chris Bellona, will go down very fast. But on the other hand, the investment, and that is the third element of the cost of CO2, the investment cost will go sky high. Because we have capex, we have to take into account how to do that. So the message is, and that was in fact what Chris Bellona mentioned, that the cement industry would like to have a refund or a sort of compensation from the EU ETS money to the cement industry. I think that is really needed. We are talking about big money that is needed for the decarbonization of the industry. And at this moment, there is no business case, also said. So if you really want to trigger the cement industry to have that decarbonization, and I think, at least I want to see it, you need financial support from governments, perhaps big producers, consumers of that, and that's really needed. So back to the issue, I think, and that one of the things that we set in our roadmap, which is essential for the decarbonization of the industry. There are many things essential, but one of the things that is essential is that financial possibility is to be created. And if that is not created, it will only be delayed. So then it's not in 25 years that we have to do 200 installations. We will have 20 years or 15 years to do that same 200 installations. And the capacity for building that stuff, including the infrastructure, yeah. So I don't want to escape from the 2050 target. Let's be clear. That's really what we want to do. The net zero we will achieve. But the message to NGOs, but also the message to the government, message to stakeholders is, this is not a free lunch. There is a lot to be taken into account in it. It is energy, it is infrastructure, it is CO2 compensation cost, it is a fair level playing field on CBAM. It is a very complex picture. Sorry for the long explanation.
No, I think it was very clear, and I think Lydia wanted to reply also because financing is another point that we wanted to touch. So.
Yeah, no, indeed. I will try to make sure to connect my response to the financing issues, but just in the economy of this being more a conversation than a series of presentations. Indeed, we're very sensible, right, to these issues, and where we know, and cement is normally, yeah, the process emission issue is a big one, and it won't be easy to decarbonize heavy industries, and especially the cement industry. However, I wanted to bring up a few points just to react to what you said. You mainly, so we were very happy also to see your roadmap to 2050 and to acknowledge your support to this instrument of the CBAM. We do keep supporting the cap being lowered to zero in 2040 because what we consider will be acceptable as emissions after 2040 will be residual emissions. However, we need to define what those will be. We do understand that it won't be possible to have full zero by 2040, but we need to understand what we can accept from an economical perspective, from a technical perspective, from a societal perspective. What is residual emissions or unabatable emissions are not all one, there's different categories, and we may choose that some of the emissions that we can't abate, we don't accept, and we get rid of part of the production, for example. This is an extreme example, but I think it's also important to challenge and make the conversation a bit lively, right? On the financing, indeed, you mentioned CCS, well, and CO2 transport and CO2 infrastructure. However, we know that clinker is the issue at stake, right? We know that the overwhelming majority of emissions for cement come from clinker, and there are ways, there are some smaller players, innovative players that are starting to produce cement with significantly lessened amount of clinker. And we should, I believe, support different kind of production and explore different kind of productions in addition to tackling the existing production that is very clinker intensive, right? So we need to invest the money in different ways and making sure we tackle the issue at stake from multiple sides. And as we were saying before, we primarily need to reduce these emissions, and only when we tackle all we could tackle to capture, store them, or remove them with different technology options. And finally, just one last point on the financing. The cement industry, and not the only sector, clearly, many others have been allocated allowances in abundance, to say the least, for many years. This was especially true up until 2013. Then after 2013, there was, well, a steep decline, but still, we can say for most year from 2013 from now, there was a slight over-allocation with a few years seeing a slight under-allocation. That was in 2021 and 2022. We're still talking about around 90 to 95% of emissions being covered by free allocation. This is like a rough estimate. Of course, it depends on the installation. So, and I mean, the ETS has been in place since 2005, and the full exposure to carbon price for the power sector, as I was saying, is from 2014. So the path we were going towards was clear. And we know that to some extent, the sector has been gaining some profits from the consistent over-allocation. And I think it will be important to see how and to understand how that money has been reinvested, because again, the trajectory, the path we were going towards was very clear since the beginning. And I think this is for policymakers, it is important that we maintain that clarity. This is important for European economy and for our positioning in the global economy. And what has been lacking in that extent, I think, is a certain degree of transparency. For industry spending and also for revenue spending, and maybe we can discuss this later.
So, Rob, I saw you.
Oh, I have a lot of remarks on this, so we can fill the rest of the day. But I don't think that is the key points. First, on the abundance of CO2 allocations from the past. 2013, that was mentioned. I think that we had two major crises, at least in the cement industry, since 2013, 2016-17 and 2020-2021, the Corona crisis. It really dropped significant part of the markets and did cost a lot of money. Apart from that, because you said that you want to have transparency on what was used or not used, and also from the governments, what they did with the money. I would like to see that too from the governments. But apart from that, when you really look in detail about the amount of money that was made available, I would say, from the EU ETS allocations that was not used for the verified emissions, that's enough. That's enough, it's not a joke, for 1 or 2 carbon capture installations. So it is nice, this discussion, but it's bullshit. We are still talking about peanuts. Peanuts of, in the past it was significant volume, now it is really peanuts for the future. And okay, we can talk about it, hours about it, but it doesn't help me. But now to the clinker to cement factor, because that was one of your elements in the discussion. And you mentioned that innovative solutions, yes. When you look at clinker to cement ratio, this clinker cement ratio in the last 2 years, I should say something else, since 2020, because only 2 years old data can be published, not the recent data. So the last 2 years, 2021 and 2022, each show a clinker to cement reduction of more than 1%, in fact 3% over these 2 years. That is massive. Why massive? 3% means, simply said, 3 million tons of clinker replaced by blast furnace slag fly ash. And now we come to the next point. Blast furnace slag. Are you still there? Do we have blast furnace slag in 2050? He says no. Fly ash from coal-fired power plants. Is there anyone from the power sector? Will we have fly ash from the coal-fired power sector? I don't think so in 2050. And that are the materials that we need today and that we will need in the future. So the message that we can have beautiful new cement types, yes, there are. The scalability of that is a very important point already today. But the more important is what is going to happen in 2050 and 2040, because the solutions that we have today will not be available in 2050 for these materials. So we have to look for new materials, calcined clay. Calcined clay is one of the solutions often mentioned. A small challenge in Europe is that the clays that we have here in Europe are only limited usable for calcined clay. Completely different to India and part of Africa and even South America. So the calcined clay that we can produce in Europe is only limited possible to be used as clinker substitution. And then we can go much more in detail. But the message is, our roadmap is going down from 77% clinker cement factor in 2021 to 60% in 2050. That is a major step. And we are talking about real massive volumes of clinker substituting materials. And to be honest, I see some solutions, but it will be quite challenging to produce with these new materials concrete, because that's the end product. Now, I had a lot of other points, but I think that I'm not allowed to put them on the table today.
I think we can move on to maybe a little bit more on the financing bit, unless you have something very urgent that you... No? Okay. And it would be great if we could keep the answers a little bit shorter. But no, so yeah, regarding the financing, I mean, there are a lot of aspects also in the previous panel. It was cited, for example, the Innovation Hub, and now I think here, the Innovation Fund, sorry. And I see here quite some let's say, differences in thinking. You know, the ways ahead, man, maybe something we could, I mean, you both agreed, at least in your publications, is that the way the Innovation Fund money are spent is not the most effective right now because of the focus only to innovation. So what are your stance on that, and how would you like to change the Innovation Fund? And can we maybe find some ways ahead that are common for both of you?
So first, I'm happy with the Innovation Fund because it triggers a lot of new projects. So Daniel, please keep it. But it's not enough because it's beautiful that the first of its kind installation is subsidized with money from the Innovation Fund. Okay, I changed a little bit for the second project, the innovative part of it. So the second of its kind also get money, but the third of its kind, And I'm talking about the tenth of its kind that also need money at the moment because there is no business case. So we have to change the Innovation Fund in an Innovation and Deployment Fund. And for that, what we suggested, and I mentioned that before, is to use EUTS money that is paid by cement industry to be dedicated for projects in the cement industry. Not just get money, it should be, of course, controlled and checked and all that, and aligned to the criteria, but at least the money should not be the limiting factor in this. The project should be.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll react to this. And sorry for putting you on the spot, but I think it's my role, right, as an NGO representative, so I had to do this. On the revenues, on the Innovation Fund, but I think it's a way bigger issue than Innovation Fund. We also are very happy with the existence of the Innovation Fund, and we're happy that a fund exists to focus on industrial decarbonization. In the past, we have called for an increase of the Innovation Fund. Now, the Innovation Fund will increase a lot thanks to the phase out of the free allocation in the coming years. I think between 2021 and 2030, we expect around 57 billion at an average, if you consider an average carbon price of 8 euros per ton, but it may end up being more than that in the end. And that we know is not enough for the reason you mentioned. We do know there's a problem with access of the Innovation Fund. Is really hard for new projects, especially for smaller actor to access it. And there are some issues with the requirements. We are trying at Carbon Market Watch to really assess how it is being used until now. We are eagerly expecting actually for the results of the fourth call to really understand how things are developing. We think that some tweaks for the best could be made. We think further focus on resource, the use of resource and resource saving could be really helpful, and also on scalability, understanding which projects are really scalable at economy-wide scalable, and not maybe only at a local level. And we need to understand to what extent certain projects are convenient, not only in terms of how financially convenient are compared to how much they save in terms of tons of CO2. Maybe I'll also go to the wider issue of member states' revenues. This is going to be a bigger pot, a really big pot, and this has already been mentioned by you, by the public. I think what we expect now from this year to 2030, again, it really depends on the carbon price, right? But around between 150 to 200 billion being auctioned. So a bit less than that will be available for member state, but you can imagine it's a big pot, and everybody wants to access it. Everybody wants a bit of the ETS revenues now, and we need to be wary. So I don't have a solution for that, and I don't think we'll find a solution for this now, but I just wanted to bring some input, right? We know that we will need money for much more than in the decarbonized industry. We need money for mitigation and adaptation. We need money for workers. We need money for the communities and vulnerable communities. We need money to protect people from energy poverty. We need money to decarbonize transport. We need to think of financing lines for all of this. And again, we need to understand that not all of this can be covered by ETS money. And the problem that we see with how member states manage the ETS money is that is not transparent enough. And we see an issue with additionality, with a lack of additionality of a lot of projects. So now we have the earmarking towards climate action, which we are very, very happy about. But we know already that before the earmarking, we had a big problem with some member states just reshuffling their resources to cover existing climate spending and cover it with EU ETS revenue. We can easily understand that there's even a bigger risk of this happening now with 100% earmarking. We need to make sure, the Commission needs to make sure that the ETS, new ETS revenues money is spent on new climate-related projects. This is essential. And this allows to foresee more spending for industry projects as well. However, if we want to spend more EU ETS revenues on decarbonizing industry, we need to understand, is this for incumbents or is this for new clean tech actors? And what are the conditionalities that we want to have? Because the good thing, what we appreciate about the Innovation Fund is the strict conditionalities that it comes with. And of course, this is also part of why it is so hard to access, but we can't expect member states to just disburse money to incumbents. And at the same time, we need to put the use of the ETS revenues money in the context. We know that there are some talks of advancing, for example, green public procurement. So this is one measure that we shouldn't double subsidize the same product, right? We need to be very careful with that. I'll stop because it's...
Yeah, no, it looks like that I'm asking for money here. That is completely wrong. So it's not just to have money. That is not the way how it should be. The Innovation Fund is having criteria for projects that are eligible or not. And that is a good set of instruments that we can use also for this type of project. It means really that projects are to be funded that really deliver the issue for the climate change. And that is what we have to achieve. It's not just to have money for something and not for incumbents only. It is really, what do we have to achieve? And that is my major message that I want to still keep in mind all the time. We have to, as cement industry, we have to deliver that net zero in 2050. And that is a huge work. I have some ideas how that can be done, but I'm really, from a financial perspective, this step is major. We have never seen that in the cement industry before. And that's not wrong, and it is only about Europe, because if we go for global levels, then we start a complete other discussion. But that is something where the support of the governments, but in fact also the support from the consumers of the products will be needed. And that's not only for cement, that is for steel, that is for all energy-intensive products. I think that we have to keep that in mind.
I mean, I think we can all agree about the support of member states is necessary and that financing is necessary. The question is also how to finance. Because I think that there are then, I mean, money can be spent in different ways, but I think we can both agree that then ETS revenues can play a role in the decarbonizing industry, even though maybe not only for that, but still they can play a role, if I understood more or less, to summarize this little, okay. Very good. Now, unfortunately, we don't have time for a Q&A session, even though it would be great, and maybe, I mean, if you are here, we're going to be here, we're going to be at the reception, so thank you very much. And thank you for listening. I hope this was interesting for you.
Thank you.
All right. So finally we get to that last bit of blah blah that everyone's been looking forward to all day. And I get the privilege to say a few words. Jonas Helset at Bellona Europa, and I would like to start with saying 30 years, it's been a long time, I haven't been here that long, but about the second half of that period, we've been fighting to get industrial decarbonization on the agenda in Brussels, in Europe. And it's been a lonely fight, I would say. I have to recognize there are a few faces in the room who've been around, you know, in that time. But it's not that many years ago that we'd be happy if we managed to fill one row of chairs here. So this is really encouraging, and I thank you all for being here. Why are we doing that? Industrial decarbonization, it's not been a sexy topic, but these are sectors that make up 20 to 25% of emissions in Europe. And I think that should be reason enough to get pretty serious about that. So now I'm going to ask you a question. Could I ask those of you in this room who are optimistic about the future of industry in Europe to put up the hand? All right, I think we're looking at maybe 1/3. That's not bad. I like optimists. I'm an optimist. But this is important, because that means there are also quite a few people in the room who are not optimists about that, including people who are obviously here knowing a lot about this topic. And I think we need to take that to heart. But I also want to say optimism, the opposite of optimism is pessimism. But the fact that you're not optimist doesn't necessarily mean you are a pessimist. It means that you're worrying. And I think, that's something we should be allowed to do. We lost a decade in which we knew how to solve this problem. The solutions are not new, but we haven't actually done the job in Europe. So when I hear Kurt van den Berg saying here today that there's no decarbonization without an industrial strategy and vice versa, I think that's important. And that's been part of what's been missing. The points he's making about just transition are important because this is about decisions that are being made in this city and also, of course, in capitals around Europe that have an impact on real people in real places on the ground around the continent. And, that has to be part of how we approach this. These are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of jobs around Europe that we have a responsibility to keep in mind when we make the decisions. And we also know that the unions, that the workers in these industries can be our strongest allies, but they can also be formidable opponents if we don't manage to get them along. We've seen that in 2015 when there was in the last conversation about reduction of free allocations. Sigmar Gabriel, who was then the Minister of Industry in Germany, he stepped on the brakes very hard when there was a conversation about reduction of free allocations in steel, because the steel workers were out in the street. They were saying this is going to cost us jobs. And we can discuss at length whether they were right or not, whether he was right or not. But this is real politics. This is the consequence of failing to take the just transition into account. If we have 100,000 steel workers on the street, if we have 100,000 workers from any industry sectors on the street protesting climate ambition, we know we're going to lose this battle. So let's not get there. Kurt was also talking about staying the course on the Green Deal. And I think that's something that, of course, we're happy to hear. But again, these decisions are important because they can have an impact for good and bad. And I would say so can non-decision. He was talking about China, about the IRA, I know we like to call it that, but not to make too much confusion. In the US, the things that are happening elsewhere in the world, which means that also failing to decide on decarbonization measures for industry, on enabling industry to decarbonize in Europe, has an impact. So it's not just the decisions that matter. And it's funny, this little booklet here, I got in European Parliament, and on the page where I took my note today, it says China all over the page. So it's just a reminder that this is something that is happening elsewhere in the world, and we have to get our act together. But it's okay to worry. It's okay to worry, but you all also came here for a reason. I think you came here because you know that we can still fix this. We can still handle this in Europe if we get this right now. And how do we do that? Hopefully you all read our roadmap that you can find here at the entrance. One of the things that we highlight is something we also heard from Kurt today: get the science back into policymaking. Well, he might not have said back into policymaking, but he underlined the point about science, which is critical. We have to get the right questions asked. We have to get the numbers on the table. And the right questions, I think, in the context of industrial decarbonization, are questions like, how much energy do you need for this process? How many resources, we heard about resource efficiency, how many resources do you need to run this process? And these are solutions that are being presented. We need to ask questions. How much carbon is involved in this process? How much carbon goes in? How much carbon goes out? Get that accounting right. What's the scalability? Rob was talking a bit about fly ash, and that being a basis for a solution when we're phasing out coal-fired power plants. Well, that should be one of the questions we're asking. Is this actually something that we have the resources for in the future? Because if the answer is, no, this doesn't exist in 2050, well, then the answer is probably not a good idea. And then, last but not least, can we scale this up within the relevant timeline? We know we need to go to net zero by 2050. So if this is a solution that can't be scaled within that relevant time frame, well, then it's not a solution that we ought to be spending a lot of time on right now. We are in an emergency situation, so we need to work on the stuff that can deliver big impact this decade, and not something that might be delivering in 2070. And that is the type of science that can help, and these questions that can help us guide the decisions about what is the infrastructure we need to enable industrial decarbonization. We heard a lot about grids today, electricity grids. That should be a no-brainer. We have renewable electricity production scaling up in Europe. We know still that this is going to be a constrained resource for the foreseeable future. That means we have to use that resource with the biggest bang for buck for climate, and that means we need the grids to get that electricity to the places where we can use it to directly electrify industry and other sectors that delivers the biggest climate outcome. We also heard about CO2 infrastructure. And sometimes I hear people worrying about, what if we put too much CO2 infrastructure, then, this is just something that leads to, keeping business as usual, etc. I don't think there's any risk anytime soon that we're going to have too much CO2 infrastructure. We have nothing. And same time, we all, I think, recognize that we need quite a lot of it. So let's just get our act together and start getting that rolled out, because that is what builds trust. That is what builds trust in industry and in the stakeholders that need to come together and say, we can do this. If there is no trust that this infrastructure is going to exist, nothing will happen. Then people will hide behind, small little incremental changes here and there, but no one comes to the table and says, we can do this. So we need to build that trust. And I would say, part of building that trust is also what we also heard quite a lot about, even from Kurt von der Berge. We've seen it in the speech of Draghi. We've seen it in some of the commissioners' briefings as well. It's public procurement rules, could also be for the private sector. How do we create demand? How do we create a prospect for industries to be able to get offset for clean products? How do we create that trust which enables industry to raise finance when they know that they have to be able to, make huge investments on plant level, but these investments can be written off over 30 years or longer. If there is that trust, it's not a problem to find that finance. So that's what we got to do. And that brings me to optimism, because we can still do that. And I'm going to do something which is a bit of a faux pas in Brussels, a bit of a, swearing in the church, which is to say, the UK, before Brexit, was one of the places where they had conversations that were helpful in that space. And I missed those conversations a little bit. I went to Teesside, industrial cluster, pretty sad place, a lot of broken industry and lost jobs, etc. Not a place you look for optimism, except that they made some decisions, which we hope they will still go ahead with, to invest in infrastructure, for grids, for CO2, for hydrogen, where that makes sense, which is not everywhere. And then, what happened? People start calling them investors, industry, that want to come there because this is a place that enables you to have clean production in the future. So that is the kind of stuff that creates optimism. That is the kind of stuff that gets people along and makes people feel like this is something we can do together. That is what we have to do in Europe. Then, there's one thing I would like to mention. I'm sure I'm running out of time. All of the good news is actually we have a hard stop. And then we get out of here. And I heard Rob saying there's no free lunch, but there is actually going to be free drinks afterward. So I'm going to wrap up soon. But first I want to say something about systems thinking. And energy systems, not only energy systems, but a systems approach is extremely important when it comes to industry. It brings us back to those questions I mentioned earlier. We have to make sure that what we do in one part of the system doesn't have a negative impact somewhere else. That goes for energy, it goes for resources, it goes for CO2, and it brings us into the space of carbon accounting. Some of those who know Bellona well here probably know that we've been spending a lot of time on carbon dioxide removal. negative emissions, as it used to be called before, for the last 15 years. Well, I think we can say we set that on the European agenda 15 years ago. We haven't spoken much about that today, and that's mainly because what we're talking about here is what we have to do this decade, but it will be important in the future. But in order to make that work, we have to get the accounting right. And that is true for everything that happens in industry as well. E-fuels is something you often hear about, mainly in the transport sector. Might be having a future in some parts of the transport sector. But if the accounting isn't right, then it goes wrong everywhere. And what I mean by that is, sometimes we hear people in industry saying they're going to decarbonize by producing e-fuels, capturing CO2 from their plants. But then you also hear the people going to burn those e-fuels with that carbon that was moved from industry, saying they decarbonize with the same product. Well, that doesn't work. That's magic accounting. We don't do that. So another example brings into the CDR space, people who talk about carbon negative aviation fuels. What is that? Have you heard about that? I heard people talking about that quite often. The people say that, you know, if you take CO2 out of the atmosphere and you put it into aviation fuel, then flying is reducing emissions in the atmosphere. But that same CO2 is just pumped out in the atmosphere again when you fly. So that's just a failure of accounting, but you see these things popping up in the media, in policy making as well, and we have to stop that, because otherwise we throw money at the wrong stuff, and we don't have time, and we don't have money to do that. So, we say often we're an industry-friendly NGO. That doesn't mean we're friends with everyone in industry. But it does mean that if you guys want to do numbers again, if you want to do maths, if you want to get this right, get the science right, you'll find an ally in Bellona. And I think we'll see that there are quite a few other people who also want to be part of that. So I'm going to bring in an old Bellona slogan, which I think is as valid as it ever was. From pollution to solution. We need clean industry to thrive in Europe. And with that, I would like to thank all the speakers who have been here today, all the panelists, and not least, I would like to thank the team who made this first, but certainly not the last, Bellona annual event possible. Particular thanks to Hannah, to Behnam, and to the comms team, Rebecca, Alicia, Clarice, and Françoise, who saved my, I think, sanity this summer by helping us to move into the new house that you're about to see, where we're going to hold a reception afterwards, and made that possible. So, at 6 o'clock, we have a hard exit here. Before that, I would like you all to pick up our roadmap. I would like to give a round of applause to everyone who's been contributing to this. Thanks everyone for coming, and see you on the other side of the Shell station. Thank you.